Welcome, everyone. This is your friend, the DN What If, here with another exciting fanfiction. Today, we're diving into the story of what if Deku became a murderer in hiding? If you enjoy this video, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more fanfiction content just like this. Now, let's get started with the fanfic. Shuda's brutally interrupted from his nap at 3 in the morning, when his work phone starts blaring from his nightstand and he well knows it's an emergency. Grumbling, he does little more than sit up, throwing the covers off, making a mental note that Hizashi isn't in bed, and grabbing the phone, hissing at the brightness before accepting the call. While he tries to hide the sleep raspiness from his voice, it might not work. Erase your head here. What's the issue? Because there's always an issue. There's a sigh on the other line. He hadn't even looked at the caller ID. A cursory glance says it's Detective Tsukachi. We've apprehended 3 villains in the last hour. As 2 of them fall under your jurisdiction, we decided to alert you as soon as possible. That piques Shuda's interest, putting the phone on speaker so he can get up and grab his jumpsuit off the floor. Looks like he'll be suiting up after all. And the 3rd villain? Tsukachi wouldn't mention the 3rd if it had nothing to do with Shoyuta. It prompts another sigh. The detective must be overworked, based on the tiredness of his voice, the way he must have been on the clock since noon. The 3rd villain falls within their same classification, and, aside from being the same age group, was apprehended while fighting the other 2. That is interesting. Shoyuta only has 2 active cases that might fit here, the first being the curious case of Shudo Todoroki, the son of the number #2-1 hero that disappeared off the map at age 14, the same day Endeavor was admitted to a hospital for frostbite and an icicle freezing his entire throat. The man's voice barely pulled through. While Shuda spent many hours, 2 years now, actually working on that case, and discovering a plethora of things about the Todoroki family and what happened behind closed doors, he shelves the thoughts in lieu of focusing on his other active case. The phone call is still ongoing as he throws his capture weapon on. He grunts acknowledgement, and Tsukachi knows well enough to be quiet for a minute or 2. The other active case he has didn't turn into a villain case until a year ago. Izuku Midoriya, the missing quirkless son of Inko Midoriya, a single mother who'd been nothing but adoring to her kid, if a little neglectful, he'd found, disappeared at age 15 after being accepted to his dream school of UA. The police originally filed it as a runaway, but there was no reason for a kid who'd just gotten his dream fulfilled to run. Then, a year later, Midoriya had been seen with supposed green lightning encircling his figure in a street fight with a gang. He'd won. Izuku Midoriya also disappeared 2 months before Katsuki Bakugu attended UA, before being kidnapped and killed in action by the League of Villains. He wasn't one of Aizawa's students, but Vlad still doesn't talk about it. So, they're curious cases indeed. Once Aizawa has his shoes on, he returns his attention to the phone call at hand. You have Shudo Todoroki and Izuku Midoriya in custody? The pleasant, if a bit grim, They were battling in an abandoned mine. Have they said why? All business now. He's Eraserhead, and he'll live up to his hero license. No, they haven't, Tsukachi says, and before Shoyuta can ask, he continues. As said, we also have another villain in custody. He's got a mask on, but he's extremely violent and unwilling to talk. We're working on identifying him now. Do you know anything about him? Shoyuta doesn't like the sounds of a bloodbath, blowout fight between 3 villains, let alone teenagers at that. They're supposed to be at home, around and doing something illegal like vandalism, not murder. He calls Midoriya Deku, and his quirk has something to do with explosions since he's been popping them off all night until we got him restrained. Interesting. It sounded a little too familiar, but Shoyuta wouldn't think of it. Instead, he thanks Tsukachi and says that he'll be at the station in 20 minutes, give or take a couple of minutes. Have they spoken at all? Shoyuta says, his face hidden in the fabric of his capture weapon as he stares through the 2-way mirror at Izuku Midoriya. The 3 villains had been put in separate interrogation rooms, although according to Tsukachi, it isn't going well. Even without restraints, the 3rd villain is restless and relentless, keeps spitting out as much vitriol as he can get away with, and Shudo Todoroki's routinely stated that he isn't speaking without a lawyer. Just great. Tsukachi shakes his head, and Shoyuta was right, in his presumption that the man hasn't slept. He's got developing eye bags worse than Shuta's, his hair is mused from running it through from stress, and he's favoring his right side rather than balancing properly. No. The most we've gotten is demands for a lawyer and from Midoriya, specifically, a request to speak with all might of all people. Isn't he? Retired? Tsukachi hums. Yes. He has been for years now, I'm certain you remember. Shoyuta does. It was national news. A child's death was overlooked for a hero's retirement, and Shoyuta lets the bitterness get to him every once in a while. Interesting, Shoyuta says instead. He stares through the two-way mirror at the boy. He isn't a man, not yet, he's still just a boy. A very, very angry boy by the looks of it. Green hair is matted down to his forehead with sweat, unkempt and wild, and he's glaring murder at the table in front of him, tapping his leg incessantly. There's blood istunji down the side of his face, but Shoyuta can't identify where it's coming from, and there's a slash across the nondescript black hoodie he's wearing, revealing pale, scarred skin. Interesting indeed, he thinks to himself. Without so much as stating that he'll do so, Shoyuta approaches the door. This kid looks like he's been through hell and has the anger to pay for it, and Shoyuta wants to know why. He understands the rage, he does. He was a teenager once, too, in a society that fails more often than it succeeds. Pinpointing the source of the anger will make him easier to talk to, and Shoyuta isn't going to call Inko Midoriya after 2 years and tell her that her son is a heartless, ruthless killer with 1 account of murder and 3 accounts of assault under his belt. That's not even counting the things they haven't caught him in the act of. Shoyuta eases the door open, careful to be slow about it, Midoriya tensed up at the slightest movement, and Shoyuta knows, instinctively, that he's dealing with a cornered animal here. Or a frightened child. Both apply. He shouldn't humanize the enemy, he's been told many times. He's been a pro-hero for years, upwards of more than a decade, sometimes that's just what he needs to do. Izuku Midoriya, Shoyuta says in a way of greeting, closing the door softly behind him, and slowly walking toward the chair opposite Midoriya. The boy says nothing, but his eyes track every one of Shuta's movements. Shoyuta pushes his capture weapon down, just a little, to let Midoriya see more of his face. You haven't demanded to see a lawyer yet. That's usually the last thing any pro wants to bring up, a lawyer, but Demon, Shuta's an underground hero with an infamous reputation for a reason. Midoriya doesn't answer or respond, again. Shoyuta sighs, more to himself than anything. My name is Eraserhead. This time, Midoriya answers by lifting his gaze to match Shuta's, tilting his head to the side. There's almost a grin painting his lips, one scarred from time and time again of being split open. No. He says it so quietly, so softly, that Shoyuta almost misses it. At that, he raises a brow. What do you mean, no? Your name, Midoriya says louder this time, leaning back in his chair. The HNDCFFS binding his wrists together clink against the metal table. Eraserhead. That's not your real name. Certainly not. This kid is confusing him, but this isn't the worst Shuta's ever dealt with, and so he'll allow Midoriya to dictate the flow of conversation. You keep it private for security reasons, Midoriya continues, and it's not on record. Undergrounders don't answer to an agency, but you get paid anyway. You're vigilantes on a payroll. Heroes with a license, Shoyuta corrects, although he's interested in where Midoriya is going with this. Same thing, isn't it? Either way, you don't follow the law, Midoriya hums, his smile only widening. You could murder a man and no one would ever know. They wouldn't care either. Do you have blood on your hands like me, Shoyuta Aizawa? His eyes widen. How the hell does this kid know his name? His silence prompts Midoriya to continue, holding his hands up only to lean his head forward and set it in his hands, the metal cuffs jingling. Heroes for hire, I know all about you. Quirk, erasure. It's very unique, you know. There's no one else on this planet that can erase someone's quirk with as little drawback as you do. You can take away someone's entire identity in the span of a second and return it just as quick. I suppose you're correct, Shoyuta says, his voice caught in his throat like his lunch probably is. There's one video of him on the internet, from when he was young and dumb and not careful enough to avoid the cameras. That couldn't possibly be enough for Midoriya to know this much about him. I know I am. Shoyuta didn't like how casual Midoriya was about all this. Why do they have you on my case, anyway? I don't do much damage with my quirk, anyway. Shoyuta knows the answer to this, at least. You can. I know that too. Who said I wanted to hurt people? Nothing other than the death you caused, Shoyuta says, gaining his footing for a second time. The kid is smart, and he knows enough about Shoyuta that he's certainly known who's been in charge of his case. And then he was fighting with Todoroki? Shoyuta isn't going to breach that topic just yet. He wants Midoriya to drop his guard, just the slightest bit. The slight hesitancy will be all Shoyuta needs to get the information he wants. Still, Midoriya's face darkens, lips curling into a scowl. If anything, it makes the blood soaking his forehead more prominent. I didn't hurt anyone. That man was a monster. That doesn't change the fact that it's murder. I did what I had to do. This is his opportunity. Shoyuta seizes it immediately, leaning forward, into Midoriya's space. Is that why you were having a brawl in an abandoned mine today? Midoriya jerks back, and it's his turn for his eyes to go wide. I didn't say anything about that. Then tell me, were you going to kill them too? No, he wasn't. Shoyuta can tell that much just by looking at him. He wasn't intending to kill anyone, just by the way his eyes immediately lose their haunted depth. It's so strikingly, obviously clear at that moment, that Midoriya is only 17 and Shoyuta sees himself in Izuku. He sees an angry kid, who believes the ends justify the means. He sees an angry kid, 16 years old, whose best friend died in a preventable building collapse. A kid. He sees a kid, not a murderer, not a villain. No. Midoriya huffs out still. No, of course not. Then why were you brawling with them? Because they're going to get themselves killed. That implies familiarity. Up until this point, Shota's been under the impression that his cases had nothing to do with each other, but that implies that Midoriya knows Todoroki, even to the point of fighting him so he didn't hurt himself. Counterproductive in the long run, but still. Info is info, and logic is logic. Oh, and who is they? Midoriya's let himself get worked up, although that's entirely Shota's fault. It means he's more loose-lipped, and Shoyuta will accept the heightened emotions for this. Actually, he's pretty sure he sees tears in Midoriya's eyes. Oh, God, he better not cry. Shoyuta has no clue how to comfort a crying child. Kaken and Todoroki-kun. So they're friends then? Shoyuta can't say he's ever fist-fought his friends because he was worried about them. The thought has crossed his mind, but he's never gone through with it, as tempting as it's always been. Shoyuta asks just that. So you're friends with them, then? Who's Kaken? Midoriya sighs, shaking his head. He's completely lost the composure that defined him at the beginning of the interrogation. Shoyuta knew he was getting to the kid, but this is a lot. A lot. You're getting in my head. Stop doing that. Can't help it, kid. At that, Midoriya scowls, but he stops looking so tense. Yes, you can. The door is over there. And prison is a couple miles out, Shoyuta says in a deadpan, and God, all he sees in front of him is a child that is angry and misguided and he doesn't know a damn thing about him, but you shouldn't go there. If you did what you think was right. I know I was right. Murder isn't all right, no matter what happens or who did what, kid, Shoyuta says, but his words feel hollow even to himself. He remembers. He remembers the burning rage, he remembers the need to justify, he remembers. And he remembers one late night, standing in an alley with blood on his hands, shaking, eyes wide but unseeing. All he could do, then, was call Hisashi, and Hisashi picked him up. They've never spoken about that night since, but sometimes Shoyuta wonders what he must have thought. Midoriya opens his mouth to speak, but Shoyuta cuts him off, entirely not thinking about what he's saying. But you still don't deserve to be thrown in the prison system. You aren't going to juvie, you're going to prison. And you don't deserve it. This time, Midoriya offers a sardonic smile, much closer to the grin he'd given Shoyuta earlier. Can't change that now, can we? We can, Shoyuta says, although this wasn't his intention coming into this room and he hasn't got the slightest clue on how to solve this. You don't think you're the first kid that fashioned themselves a vigilante, do you? There's some truth to that. Shoyuta always planned on being a hero, but until he got his provisional license, he didn't care if it was legal or not. Midoriya's brows raise, perhaps in shock, but he stays silent, to let Shoyuta continue. Neither you nor your friends deserve prison for vigilantism. You're kids. And that's all Shoyuta can see, kids. You're still school age. You applied for UA, didn't you? And I got in too, Midoriya scoffs. There's a gleam to his eyes, though, like he's very, very curious about the offer he's about to be given and is trying his damnedest to stifle it. Shoyuta has to say he agrees. Rumor has it your friend Tadeuki would have gone to UA too. Kaken did go, says Midoriya, conversationally. You know, I think he's the only dead kid on the school's record. The fall of All Might, was it? Aren't we calling that Kamino Ward? Shuta's blood runs cold for a second time. Katsuki Bakubu, Shoyuta says in a low whisper, the loudest he's sure his voice will go. Midoriya hums. Turns out the heroes didn't save him, but the villains didn't save him either. Guess he ended up in the mud like the rest of us, huh, Eraser? Shuta's looking at Izuku Midoriya, Shuto Todoroki, and Katsuki Baku. He's looking at a runaway mystery-turned-villain, the son of the #1 hero with a grudge burning him alive, and the boy that supposedly died under Dabi's flames at Kamino Ward. And we'll drag you out, Shoyuta says resolutely, his voice hardening as confidence returns. There's a program there that can help you. There isn't, but now that Shuta's said it, he'll make Diemen good on the promise that it will exist. Elaborate, Eraser, Midoriya says, after a moment or two of silence. So, Shoyuta obliges, making the details up as he goes. We're a hero school, that much you know. According to your mother, it was your dream school. We train hero hopefuls, but they come to us, and we have to teach them everything. But you already know how to fight, you already know how to win. You know what you have to do. Even if it has to be tweaked a little. The scowl is back. Shuta's wondering if the other kids are this expressive. Even if you need more of a moral compass, Shoyuta corrects. You wouldn't go to prison. Your files would be sealed. You'd live on campus at UA, 3 meals a day. You'd graduate high school. You'd have options. And the only option currently isn't an option at all. Observant. Midoriya rolls his eyes. I'm well aware. I'd need to talk to them before accepting your offer. Shoyuta hums, nodding his head. I can arrange that. Shoyuta does arrange that, and he arranges a couple of calls with Nezu while Todoroki, Midoriya, and Bakugo all talk, having been led to a single interrogation room. Midoriya had made it out like they were all close friends, although Bakugo sticks to the edges of the room and snarls whenever one of them tries to talk to him, and Todoroki just seems confused. Understandable. They haven't contacted Endeavor yet, out of principle. He's obligated to know as Todoroki's parent, but the loophole provided by Todoroki's current presumed dead legal status is good. They talk and talk and talk, and at the 45-minute mark, he interrupts their conversation by entering the room. Bakugo stays by the door, arms crossed and scowling. He edges away from Shoyuta if anything. Todoroki is instantly on guard, and there's ice still melting off his skin, notably his neck. It must not have disappeared when his quirk was nullified by the HNDCFFS. Midoriya, at least, doesn't seem startled by his presence. He is, of course, the only one that has spoken to Shoyuta before. We'll accept your offer, he says immediately. Shoyuta can't wipe the look of shock off his face quickly enough. So, naturally, Midoriya continues. We have conditions though, he says, confident and defiant, arms crossed and mirroring Bakugo, all down to the glare. We aren't going to play your hero game for the hell of it. Todoroki is not to be contacted by Endeavor under any circumstances or we're leaving. You aren't to treat us differently because of our past. Reasonable demands, Shoyuta says, because they are. He hadn't expected the bar to be that low, but then again, these are kids, kids that have been on their own, kids that have been mistreated, Kids that think fighting in an abandoned mine until blood is drawn is the proper way to care for your friends. Midoriya nods. Good. And we have one more condition. What is it? That our friends are given the same offer, Midoriya says, his voice oozing a smug satisfaction. If Shoyuta doesn't accept, then they know he doesn't really care about them, and if he does accept, then he's creating what is, well, a plethora of villain kids in a hero school. But they're just that, kids, and so there's no hesitation when Shoyuta hums his agreement. Then you have a deal. Midoriya gives him a list. The kid said it had the names and professions of everyone that he wants to offer a place in the newly founded program, that Nezu is working on completing the paperwork for while Midoriya, Bakugo, and Todoroki are in holding. Tracking down each individual is Shuta's job. It's another way of Midoriya giving him a test of trust. If he doesn't put the effort into finding them, then Midoriya and the other two won't trust him. It's that simple. It's a short list, all things considered. Ochako Uraraka. Hitoshi Shinso. Information broker. Momo Yaoyorozu. Arms dealer. Ijiro Kirishima. Enforcer. Himiko Toga. Assassin. Denki Kaminari. Hacker. Mina Ishido. Villain. Don't tell her I said that. Hantasiro. Enforcer. Tenya Ida. Vigilante. In the time it takes Shoyuta to track down the first person on Midoriya's list, the three have been in holding for a week. Shoyuta shouldn't be surprised. He's been working Midoriya and Todoroki's cases for a better part of a year, and he'd barely uncovered the surface, let alone know they knew each other, let alone been aware that Katsuki Fang Bakugo played into that, let alone all the people and allies they'd amassed. Regardless, it's enough time for Cementos and Nezu to conspire to create an entirely new dormitory, hidden on the side of campus, easy to pass by without recognition. It's perfect for a class of what is, essentially, villains. Villains, hiding in plain sight in the most renowned hero school in the nation. Shoyuta still doesn't know how he convinced Nezu of that one, but the principal had jumped at the idea when Shoyuta suggested it. He finds Tenya Ida first. Given their history, it isn't surprising. And it isn't surprising that Tenya's found his calling in vigilantism. Tenya had grown up coming over to Hizashi and Shuta's place almost every weekend, but the weekend Tensei was paralyzed in Hosu, Tenya went missing. Shuta's always expected that he ran away, that perhaps the boy was the cause for the corpse found in a back Hosu alley. The hero killer's legacy never lived on, and still, it's a mystery to the media. But Shoyuta knows. Shoyuta will always know it was the boy with the rage in his eyes after seeing his brother in the hospital. So, when he finds Tenya, it's on the rooftop in Hosu, nostalgic if anything. Eraserhead, Tenya says, standing on the edge with a mask concealing the lower half of his face, looking out over the edge, to the city full of his worst memories. Full of all of his memories since 14 years old. Tenya's 17 now. That's 3 birthdays, 3 years of holidays, 3 years of one more year, we can look one more year. You never took a name, Shoyuta says. When he'd searched into Tenya, into Hosu's mysterious lowered crime rates, it's completely out of his jurisdiction and his patrols, but this is Tenya, and this is what Midoriya asked of him. He hadn't found a DMN thing. There were a few reports of a vigilante, but none of them were concrete enough to be a lead. There were far more reports of a villain, but looking at Tenya now, a sleek black metal armor in mimicry of Tensei's old costume, all Shoyuta can see is the echoes of grief and rage. I didn't, Tenya says, eventually, still refusing to turn back and look at Shoyuta. Perhaps it's because he doesn't want Shoyuta to see the look in his eyes, or perhaps it's because he doesn't know what Shoyuta wants. It's still a lot of trust. Tenya still trusts him, even after all this time. He trusts that Shoyuta isn't going to arrest him. Shoyuta has no intention of breaking that trust. Izuku Midoriya, Shoyuta says eventually, walking toward the ledge of the roof in even, loud steps. When he gets to the edge, all he does is sit down, swinging his legs over it. It gives Tenya power in the conversation, as obvious as his ploy was. What do you know about him? That, too, takes a while for Tenya to respond to. I know of him. Why are you here, Eraser? Because he's been taken into custody. There was no reason to skirt around the truth. All it would do is cause a shutdown, and that can't happen. If Tenya clams up, Shoyuta will be back at square one. He doubts that Midoriya will take no for an answer and, damn it, well, and I've gotten him out of custody. How did you do that? Curiosity, that's good. If Tenya's interest is piqued, he'll want to know more. It's in his nature. Shoyuta hums, keeping it vague on purpose. There's a program UA's starting and he's agreed to go. However, his condition is that I extend this offer, placement in the program, to selected individuals. You are one of those individuals, Tenya. While Tenya winces at the use of his given name, he shows no other outward reaction. He doesn't have his glasses on, and his helmet is up. Shoyuta can see his face plain as day, but he can't read the expression flitting across it. What is the program? Tenya says, and sits on the edge with Shoyuta as he does so. It's a reformation program. Shoyuta goes on to explain the program, its purpose, how it's there to course-correct misguided kids, as it says on the official paperwork. But he already knows Tenya will agree. Tenya said as much when he sat next to Shoyuta rather than walking away. The next person on Midoriya's list that Shoyuta manages to find is Himiko Toga. He doesn't find her on purpose. In fact, he's just trying to enjoy his lunch break at a cafe in the city when he hears a scream. Being a pro-hero for a decade means that Shuta's already up and running before he has a chance to question what caused the scream. He's already in the middle of the street when he sees a body lying on the ground of an alley and a streak of blonde disappearing behind a corner. Shoyuta grimaces, his grip on his capture weapon tightening as he takes off in that direction, passing the body without doing a one-over. They're still alive, but barely, and Shoyuta knows someone's already called the authorities. The scream had pierced through the air. Instead, it takes him on a long, winding journey through back alleys. When it ends, it's because the figure he's chasing has reached a dead end, and even so, Shoyuta would have lost her as she climbed up a fire escape, had she not turned her head and looked him dead in the eye. And he knew. He's been reviewing the case files pertaining to the list Midoriya's given him, and he recognizes the fangs, recognizes the eyes, the messy buns. Himiko Toga. The girl falters on the fire escape, one leg precariously hanging off the rail. She's in the process of climbing over it and onto the actual stairwell, and he needs to stop her soon. Himiko Toga. Shoyuta repeats again, slower, watching as her eyes narrow in on him. There's no flit of recognition, but there is suspicion. I'm not here to arrest you. I just murdered a woman in an alleyway, she said, and if Shoyuta wasn't mistaken, there was a giggle in her words. And you aren't here to arrest me? What sort of hero are you? Not a real one, that's for certain. Okay, so Shoyuta has to pick his words carefully. Midoriya's list had started that Toga was an assassin, and so that was probably her target. If she was an assassin, she did it either because of the money or because she found joy in it. From the giant smile across her face, Shuta's inclined to think it's the former. But when he sees the red blood dripping across that smile, he changes his mind. If you were a criminal, I would have to arrest you, Shoyuta says, slowly. He doesn't know if slow is his best option, given the fact that he doesn't know how long he can keep Toga's attention, but it's worth a shot. I don't think you're a criminal. She tilts her head to the side, finally completing her climb over the rail. She doesn't try to run, though. She's invested in the conversation, and Shoyuta ignores the blood splashed across her shirt. Are you saying I'm not a monster? That's exactly what I'm saying. That's such an odd question to ask. He's been speaking to her for less than a minute and that's what she has to say to it? Someone must have beat it into her head, then. Based on the blood patterns, she was drinking the blood. She was drinking the blood. Shuta's mind flashes back to the file he'd read. Her quirk allows her to transform into other people. It hadn't specified how, just that it involved a gruesome process. She used her quirk by drinking blood. So that's why she's an assassin then. Shoyuta continues, then without giving her time to continue. I don't think you're a monster, kid. And I'm sure your friends don't either. Friends? Midoriya Izuku. An even bigger grin breaks out across Toga's face, her eyes lighting up. Oh really? How do you know Aizu? Are you one of his friends? Has he talked to you lately? Oh, Did he bring that really pretty girl again? He's at UA. He wanted me to offer you a place in the program with him. You'll get all the blood you need, you'll live on campus. That's all the convincing Toga needs, and Shoyuta subtly erases the security camera footage of what happened in that alley the moment he gets back into his office. The next pair, he finds together. He's on a mission recommended to him by Namuri, checking in on the illegal arms traffic that's been spreading like a virus through their side of Japan as of late. The base he's found is in a bar, a dingy sort of place that's on its last legs and clearly held together by less than legal money, given the 3 cars in the parking lot of the whole place. The lights are dim and flickering, drawing attention to a pool table with 2 people around it. Shoyuta squints, and he knows he's supposed to make his way to the bar, sweet talk, threaten the bartender into giving up information, but he recognizes the 2 people around the bar. Barely, but he does. The first one he recognizes off the bat, sporting an easy grin and a pool stick, leaning over the table to get the perfect shot, sleeves cut off at the shoulders and a black mullet accentuated by a ring of gold bands like highlights in it. Hantashiro. Midoriya had written him down as an enforcer, and when Shoyuta struggles to place the second person around the pool table, he remembers the only other individual on the list with the same occupation name. Ijiro Kirishima. Kirishima doesn't look the same in his case file photos as he does right now in the flesh. Instead of long, black hair, he's sporting spiked-up red hair, a flannel, and a pair of jeans that have clearly seen better days. He wouldn't have looked threatening, save for the glint of a dagger sticking out of the waistband of his jeans. Shoyuta can't see his face, right now, but he wonders what else has changed from the file. As the story goes, Ijiro Kirishima was a happy boy living a happy life, with 2 loving and doting mothers. He was 14 when a villain attack happened to be on the street he was near. Instead of freezing like Kirishima should have done, the boy rushed headfirst into it, and promptly got thrown into a building. He came out okay, because of his quirk, hardening, where he's able to harden every part of his body, but he was still berated by the pros who'd come to the scene. After that, everything gets blurry. From what Shoyuta pieced together, Kirishima went missing months later. But he's still legally dead, because his mother's found a suicide note in his bed the day after he went missing. Clearly, something had interrupted him before that happened, as he's standing in front of Shoyuta playing pool. Thank God, Shoyuta thinks, even though he has no right to it. Hantashiro, on the other hand, was an easier case to stomach. Always on the wrong side of the law for all the right reasons, there were various reports of physical assault pressed against him, but Shoyuta only saw self-defense, and severe bullying from the sounds of it. Shiro's mother had been convinced he'd one day end up dead if he stayed where he was. So, Shiro moved to a boarding school. 2 weeks into it, Shiro got into a fight with some of the older kids, and all the details are vague in the report. Undoubtedly a cover-up by the people that could pay for it. Shiro was expelled, but he never made it back home. There was an accident on the highway, and no bodies were ever discovered. It's rather relieving to see life in both of their faces, now that should have seen them outside of the photographs from 3 years ago. Instead of walking up to the bartender, Shoyuta approaches those 2. They see him out of the corner of their eyes. Shiro mutters something to Kirishima, and Kirishima tenses up. Who's winning? Shoyuta says rather than going for the kill. While Toga had needed a hands-on approach, he doesn't think that same method is going to apply here. Toga was an assassin because she needed the blood and the money. Kirishima and Shiro had motives that Shoyuta hasn't been able to grasp yet. I am. It's Kirishima who answers, his voice oddly low. He's lowering it on purpose, Shoyuta thinks. He's trying to sound older than he is. Because he's 17. Because these are 2 17-year-olds standing across from him, who do the dirty work for the highest bidder. These are children. These are children that are presumed FING dead. The more Shoyuta thinks about it, the more his blood boils, and that's a dangerous thing. So, he doesn't bother faking a smile, looking instead at the pool stick in Shiro's hands and not the scars crisscrossing the boy's arms. Like someone had tried to cut out his elbows. I assume you know I'm not here to play, Shoyuta says, matching Kirishima's tone. Shiro shrugs. We don't know a thing we aren't paid to know. And I'm not paying you. So that's why they were doing it. Or why Shiro was, at least, the money. A good thing to have, given the fact that he must be living on his own. Shoyuta continues, before letting either of them could get their indignance voiced. I'm seeking you out. Because there's an offer on the table for you. How much does it pay? That's Kirishima again, and this time, Shuta's able to get a proper look at his face. Kirishima certainly looks as young as he is, boyish and charming. There's a small scar going across his eyelid, and his eyes have been lined in pencil, giving him a more tired look. There are bandages across his cheek, tight and professionally wrapped. Still, red seeps out of the edges of the bandage. What the hell has happened to these kids? A place to live, 3 square meals, and no more dirty work, Shoyuta says, shrugging his shoulders and watching as Shiro's eyes narrow in, suspicion spurred on by years on his own. How many times have these kids been lied to? Deceived? Beaten? Still, Kirishima continues the conversation. And what's the catch? Does it need a catch? Shiro scoffs. The game of pool is completely stopped at this point. There's always a catch. What is the catch? Shoyuta grimaces, although he doubts either child is able to discern the differences in his facial expressions. Well, I suppose being back in high school could be considered a catch. Dead silence. Shoyuta sighs. UA High School, yes, you heard right, is implementing a new program to help teens like you. Our first student has specifically requested that you be there. And who is that student? Shiro says, setting the pool stick down and crossing his arms, a brow raised. His eyes are swimming in questions, and Shoyuta will only answer when he can actually tell them his name. Izuku Midoriya. Shiro says, but that's the only reaction he gets. Kirishima doesn't look nearly as convinced. Maybe the two weren't as close then? Shoyuta, then, decides to pull the only strings he has. If you're worried you're beyond help, and what our program can do for you, I can assure you're not. Izuku Midoriya, Shudo Todoroki, Katsuki Bakugo, I'm more than certain we can help. Shoyuta doesn't know what it is, which of his words resonate with Kirishima, but an upturned twitch of his lips is all the response he gets, and he knows that he has no more convincing to do. He's already back at UA when he realizes he didn't complete the mission at all. And he hears on the news the next day that without any protection detail, Present Mike and Powerloader were able to bring down the arms dealers. Shoyuta spends 3 nights sitting in the rafters of a warehouse currently containing jewelry worth more than every single paycheck Shuta's gotten in his life combined. He's taken to bringing a sandwich with him, because he's tired, it's late, and he doesn't particularly enjoy the fact that he's only here because of the whims of a 17-year-old who thought that making a list suddenly put him in charge. It's a power move, certainly, but Shuta's well aware the kid is F'd in the head. All of them are, and Shoyuta can't even blame them for it. The night something happens, he's in the middle of eating his sandwich and scrolling through another cat video Hisashi sent him. It's nothing at first, and he thinks it's the whistle of the wind. And then Shoyuta realizes it's the sound of glass being cut, a precision tool cutting through with ease. The circle is complete as a gloved hand touches the outer edge of the glass, and then it floats out of its place. Yes, Shuta's meeting Uravity. She's isn't infamous. That's a good thing in the line of thieves. Her quirk is especially handy, being able to nullify gravity on objects around her at her command. It makes heists easier, and Shoyuta can understand why she's taken the life she's chosen. It was either steal or let her parents' company drown. Shoyuta knows, because he interviewed Ochako Uraraka's parents, and they knew. They must have known. He took a maybe illegal look at their finances later, but if he saw a consistent 500,000 yen deposit into their account every 2 weeks or so, he didn't report it anywhere. When a figure starts to crawl into the opening made by the removed glass, rope attached to their belt, Shoyuta stares and activates his quirk. The glass sitting next to the roof topples, and a strangled sound of surprise leaves the girl's mouth. Good to see you, Shoyuta says conversationally, despite the fact that he'd rather be at home in bed with his husband than tracking down a 17-year-old that he may or may not want to actually stop. Technicalities and Midoriya's list. Who are you? Uraraka gasps out, holding on for dear life to the rope tethering her. Her balance must be off. She does use her quirk a rather lot, It probably affects her perception of the world. Eraserhead, Shoyuta answers easily, putting his sandwich back into a plastic bag and jamming it into his pocket. Before jumping from the rafter, he was perching onto a rafter closer to the girl. And I have an offer to give to you. Considering he's the only one that can get her out of the warehouse without any alarms going off now that the glass has already broken, she agrees rather quickly. Mina Ishido and Momo Yaoyorozu are also found together. It is also another accidental find. Shuda's wandering his patrol route, wondering maybe if he should turn in early. After all, it's 1 a.m. on a Thursday and there's barely anyone out. No one wants to commit petty crimes on a Thursday, apparently, which seems rather strange. Either way, his plans of going home are ruined when he sees a wall corrode as he's walking past it. It's entirely coincidence, but Shoyuta takes the entire thing in stride and immediately vaults into the building, through the hole in the wall, carefully avoiding the dripping acid. It takes a minute, his quirk already activated and hand already in his capture scarf. He's glaring down Mina Ishido, who's got her lip upturned into a snarl and acid literally dripping down the palms of her hands, dripping down her wrists. It isn't affecting her skin, thank God, but it's corroding the sleeves of the ungodly leopard print jacket she's wearing. Across from her, arms held in an X against her face to protect from the supposed blow, is Momo Yaoyorozu. She doesn't look shocked, not really, and she's got protective gear surrounding her entire body. The only thing not covered is her face and her hair. Now that Shuda's shown up, they're at a stalemate. Why don't the both of you explain to me what the hell you think you're doing? Shoyuta says calmly, if only because he doesn't want the situation to escalate any further, and given the fact that he's pored over their files enough to recognize them on sight, he needs to make sure they accept his offer. She's trespassing, Yaoyorozu says easily, bringing her arms down, but refusing to move. She isn't backing down, but she isn't entirely rejecting Shuda's presence. She's an arms dealer. She's got one hand in the sticky side of the law at any given time. She doesn't know whether to trust Shoyuta or not, but she's clearly labeled Ishido as the prime threat in the room. That means he's at an advantage. On the other hand, Ishido's categorized him as the biggest threat in the room. Get out of my way, hero, she snaps, her palms never going down. Now that he's activated his quirk, her acid is useless. It's still developing, secreting out of her palms, but there's no corrosive properties to it. To have one's quirk turn against them is a dangerous game, Shoyuta knows. I'd like to extend an offer to both of you. What? He clearly wasn't going to get a concrete conversation out of both of them, and if he managed to get this over with, if he brought them back to UA and managed to get all the paperwork filed, he could maybe go home before 5. That would be FNG wonderful. It'd be before he even needed to be up before classes too. What kind of offer? Yaoyorozu says, walking away from Ishido, to her desk. Like there isn't a gaping hole in the side of her office, and there isn't a villain, a child, and a pro-hero in the room. She sits in her office chair and stares the both of them down. Honestly, Shuda's impressed. The kind of offer that would make this disappear, he says vaguely, still staring Ishido down. It's not like he has many choices. It's still highly likely that she'll try to kill him as soon as he lets his guard down, and Shoyuta needs to blink. The criminal record, he says, clearly addressing Ishido. Then to Yaoyorozu. The reputation. Everything would disappear. Ishido quite literally spits on the floor. And what would happen to us? She says it like she wasn't trying to kill Yaoyorozu less than a minute ago, but Shoyuta can sense that he's piqued her interest, and that's all it really takes, doesn't it? He lets his guard down, he blinks, and while fabric sizzles as the corrosiveness of Ishido's acid returns, she doesn't attempt to maim anyone. You'd be housed. Given food. Given peers. Given an education. He doesn't know the kind of lives they've led. He's rather certain that the two of them have led very different lives, where perhaps the same thing could mean opposites thing. He doesn't know anything about that, so it's best to keep it vague. But he can't make it out to seem too good. You'll have to work your butt off. You won't be allowed off campus. You'll be monitored almost every second of the day. But you'll have your lives back. And what makes you think I hate my life, Eraser? Yaoyorozu says easily, clipped, her eyes narrowed. He realizes, belatedly, that he didn't tell her his name. I don't, Shoyuta shrugs, And this is where he knows he's got them because it's worked every time so far. But Izuku Midoriya does. They both accept his offer, and he does get home at 5 a.m. on the dot. Shoyuta doesn't find Denki Kaminari. Denki Kaminari finds him. In fact, Shuta's leaving class. He's at UA, one of the most secure buildings in the nation. For some goddamn reason, it is easy to forget they're just a high school, isn't it? When he comes across the boy. When that happens, it's because he leaves his classroom, gets to the front door and realizes he forgot his coffee cup back at his desk. Naturally, that's a sin he can't live with, so Shoyuta turns back around to grab it. He walks back into his classroom, and there sits a blonde with a lightning bolt burned into his hair, sitting on the edge of Shuta's desk and tossing the coffee cup side to side like an apple. Forget something, eraser? His voice is playful, there's mischief dancing in his eyes, but Shoyuta can't just ignore everything else. Everything else about this boy screams dangerous. There are Lichtenberg scars running from under his neck down to his chest, perhaps going down his arms, but Shoyuta can only see what the shirt and jacket don't cover. Electricity crackles off him in waves, like his body simply can't contain it all, a living lightning bolt. It's impressive. Why are you here? Shoyuta says instead of bothering with anything else. In fact, he doesn't even reach for his capture scarf or get into a defensive stance. Every bone in his body, every instinct, is screaming at him, that's what he needs to do. But there's a nagging feeling in the back of his head that, the moment he tenses up, the moment he loses. He doesn't know what game Kaminari is playing, but he has no intention of losing. In fact, Kaminari seems pleasantly surprised by his reaction. Oh, I just heard through the grapevine. You're recruiting for some special program UA's keeping off the books, aren't you? What's it to you? Kaminari shrugs. He does not stop tossing the coffee cup around. It's empty, but it still grates on Shuta's nerves. Just want to know. It's Izuku Midoriya, isn't it? What? Okay, now that has Shoyuta confused. Everyone has been convinced by the mere mention of Midoriya's name, but they haven't been forthcoming with any information about the boy. Izuku Midoriya. Kaminari continues like Shoyuta hadn't spoken at all. Is one hell of a guy, I'll give him that. Whatever little army you're letting him make, you should keep it on a short leash. We're all villain kids, remember? Kids, Shoyuta says without his goddamn consent, thank you very much. You're all still kids. Oh we? Am I included in that? Just continue like this was your plan in the first place, Shoyuta. Yes, actually. You, Denki Kaminari, Electrokinetic, are on Midoriya's first-class ticket to UA. For a while, Kaminari is silent. When he looks up, lightning flashes in his eyes, and while the lights in the classroom flicker, Shoyuta barely has a second to wonder anything about it before Kaminari's hopping off the desk and tossing him the cup. Sick. When do I start? The last person on Midoriya's list is the most DMN elusive to find. Shoyuta knows this because he's pored over the file, and the file barely exists. Here is what he knows. Hitoshi Shinso is an information broker, according to Midoriya. According to the government and every other shady organization Shuta's tried so far, Hitoshi Shinso is a ghost. He was 3 years old when he was given up by his parents, whose names he can't find in any system whatsoever, due to the nature of his quirk. His quirk, brainwashing, was reportedly stifled strictly by his foster care families. There's a CPS case full of evidence of child abuse and neglect, of Shinso being muzzled, of having to move homes every few weeks, of the kid showing up to school with bruises and burns all over him. It's a sad story, and it makes Shuta's heart start to ache, sure, but he's seen hundreds of cases like this. Abused kids in the foster system with a bad quirk. It gets interesting when Shinso turns 10, because while his life had been extremely documented until then, once he hits his 10th birthday, he's off the grid. Entirely. The only information listed on him after his 10th birthday is the following sentence with an extremely blurry photograph. Suspect was seen ducking into apartment B13. Inspected, search yielded no results. There are no notes on what he was a suspect for, who was looking for him, nothing. Hitoshi Shinso is the ghost of a FING abused foster kid, and that's all Shoyuta knows. But an information broker has to have connections, and in whatever's web Shinsu's sewn himself, there has to be a leak. Midoriya himself gave him the list, and Shoyuta could always ask, but that's another part of this test. If Shoyuta asks for help, then Midoriya will believe he's not capable of doing the work himself. Another pointless trust game. God, teenagers are effing annoying. Shoyuta still goes through the web. He goes from some back alley smack dealer to a guy who was a little too interested in the women in the pro-hero ranks, to here is a rundown apartment, and rundown is putting it nicely, considering Shoyuta saw a rat scurrying around the corner with a piece of stale bread in its mouth. He's got 2 large bodyguards flanking him by the doorway, and in front of him, sitting on an old dining table, legs crossed and a Game Boy, is Hitoshi and Shinso. What the F is Shuta's life, again? Eraserhead, Hitoshi says, and his voice is as smooth as honey. It's clear he takes care of it, understandable, given the nature of his quirk. People with verbal quirks tended to be more cautious of things like smoking and drinking. Shoyuta would know. Nice to see you here. Is there anything you'd like? A word with you is all, Shoyuta says evenly, tilting his chin up. He isn't scared of some teenager in an abandoned apartment with a FING Game Boy. Let alone one with purple hair and a plain goddamn black hoodie. What are they in a bad 90s flick? That'll cost you a pretty penny, Shinso says, flashing a smile that's all teeth and no warmth, and Shoyuta understands why Namuri calls his smile creepy now because he does the exact same thing. Shoyuta rolls his shoulders, squares his jaw. I think I'm paid in advance. Izuku Midoriya says at least. It piques Shinsu's interest. That's been the turning point in every conversation so far. With a wave of his fingers, the 2 bodyguards leave Shoyuta and Shinso alone, with Shoyuta still standing in the middle of the room and Shinso not even bothering to get off the table. He sent you, eh? Does he not remember the last time he came my way? I wouldn't know. And that's the truth, as annoying as it is. You're an information broker, so you tell me. Do you know why I'm here? Shinso is silent. Shoyuta decides to take a gamble, speaking but looking around at the kitchen and not at Shinso. I mean, you're the one who let Kaminari know why, where, and how to find me, aren't you? From the way Shinsu's shoulders tense up and he actually bothers to tentatively slide off the table, he hits the nail on the head. There's amusement in his tone, but it isn't real. It's so, obviously, very clearly not real. You're playing a dangerous game, Eraser. Time to take another gamble. It's a game you've been playing for a long time. Aren't you tired of your spider's web? Shinso laughs, hollow and vacant. Are you trying to tell me that Midoriya put me on his miracle list? That's exactly what I'm implying. He's effing stupid to do that, you know? They leave the apartment together, and Shinso doesn't breathe a word of whatever happened between him and Midoriya. Shoyuta doesn't ask, and Shoyuta doesn't want to know. Villain kids or not, teenagers still have their petty drama, and he'll respect that. Izuku would be lying if he said he expected Aizawa to recruit all the people on his list. It was a long shot, and that was saying the least. Izuku doesn't have the best relations with everyone there, and not everyone wanted to be saved. Surprise, surprise, when he wakes up in the morning, in the desolate silence of the Heights Alliance dormitory he's been assigned, already resigning himself to Bakugu's yelling, "It'll start up at 5:30 a.m. like it always does." When the elevator does open on the ground floor, well, he isn't alone. Bakugu isn't there, not yet, because it's 5:15 in the goddamn morning, and neither is Todoroki, but 9 other people are. 9 other people, present and accounted for, everyone that he asked Aizawa to extend his offer to. Izuku never stated that Aizawa had to get them to agree. What the hell, he says blankly, rather than acknowledging it to its fullest extent. It's still dark outside, the sun barely touching the horizon as the first light dares to spill across the courtyard, and he needs coffee. Uraraka hums from where she's sitting on the countertop, swinging her legs over the edge and glancing at Izuku curiously. It's been a while. How are you, Deku? Could be better. He gestures around the dorms vaguely, drawing attention to the bracelet around his wrist. It's less of a bracelet and more of a monitor, a glorified shock collar that'll give him one hell of a wake-up call if he tries to leave UA's campus. There's a bright white 18 printed in bold across the side. Kaminari, of whom Izuku knew showed up to UA a while ago and hadn't seen since, laughs. Oh boy, I don't like thinking about you as an attack dog. What's Eraser doing to you? Izuku shrugs, beelining toward the cabinet with his favored coffee grounds in it. Where have you all been? It's Ida who answers, unsurprisingly. We've been under surveillance as Eraserhead processed our transfer into the program. I've been wondering about that, Uraraka says. I mean, how shady is this? Well, I know you're legally missing, Deku. So, how did they get you into the program? And me? Oh, shit, Izuku jumps, startled, and wonders how the hell he managed to completely forget Kirishima was there. Kirishima was always one of the biggest presences in the room. He was tall and bulky, all sheer muscle mass, and his spiked-up red hair made him hard to miss. That was just the intimidation factor, not even taking into consideration his sparkling personality and how he managed to draw everyone in. He's a hard person to miss, but when he draws back into his shell, he always tries to make himself look smaller. It works. He's clearly uncomfortable being in the dorms. Join the FING club. With all the attention now directed on him, Kirishima shrugs self-consciously. I mean, I'm legally dead. Apparently, I committed suicide when I was in middle school, so there's no way in hell I should be here. It's because it's all swept under the rug, Kaminari snorts, and of course he would know. He is the Black Hat hacker, of course. It makes sense that he'd do his research before even daring to approach Eraserhead. It's a juvenile detention program, basically, but all the specifics are intentionally vague. Whatever this is, it's property of the Hero Commission. Izuku grimaces, and he isn't the only one. We aren't their dogs. We might as well be yours, Ashido mumbles, her arms crossed as she glares down the cabinet next to Izuku. He wouldn't be surprised if she somehow managed to make that corrode too. He misses the way she used to be. Happy-go-lucky and excitable, always the brightest and loudest in the room, always managing to coax a smile out of everyone. It's clear in the way she walks and talks that she's left that behind her, and based on the empty eyes watching her, Shiro and Kirishima miss it too. Ignore her. Leave it to Shinso to diffuse the tension. Odd, considering usually he was the one stirring it up, just for the hell of it. Usually, he's a hard boy to track down and even more difficult to reason with, although that simply might be because Izuku's pride doesn't let him gamble the way Shinso so prefers. Get your coffee, and then you're explaining to us why we're your ragtag fucking A-team. Good question. Izuku will certainly need coffee to figure that one out. At 5:30 on the day, Bakugo starts yelling about whatever's begun to annoy him in the kitchen. Izuku's sitting on the couch in the common room, mug tucked close to his chest as he watches the sun begin its journey with little interest. His mind is other places, though he still notices the way Kirishima automatically brightens, the way he essentially throws himself into the kitchen. It's been a while since Kirishima and Kakin have had a chance to speak. Izuku's rather certain an undercover gig had Kirishima busy for the better part of the last 3 months. They're all here now. Aizawa somehow managed to get every single person on his list to come to UA, to be the hero's lapdogs for one reason or another. There are so many strings attached that no one in their right mind would agree willingly, right? Well, he did, but he gave his conditions, and he did it for a reason. If Sho Yuta Aizawa wants to act like he can save them, then he can put his money where his mouth is. Izuku's been disappointed time and time again, and this isn't a cry for help. It's a simple truth. If Aizawa's different, then he's going to act like it right off the bat. And he has. The last time Izuku saw Hitoshi Shinso, it was with the information broker lying in a pool of his own blood with a pair of bloodied brass knuckles next to his head. It wasn't Izuku's doing, but it had been Izuku's choice to walk away. He'd called Todoroki right after, just so that Todoroki could make sure that Shinso was okay. Todoroki made one hell of a medic for a guy who was convinced he broke everything he touched. Shinso was fine, but the bruises and the new scar would last for a while, always a reminder. So, it was rather safe to say that Shinso wasn't Izuku's biggest fan, and yet, Aizawa somehow managed to get him here, in this glorified prison. Because now they're at UA, and if a hero says jump, they're supposed to say how high. It won't be that easy. They're kids, sure, he's rather certain that's what keeps tripping Aizawa up, he's rather certain that's what caused his sudden soft spot. It's why Izuku chose the people on his list to all be the same age. In a different world, maybe they'd be classmates, friends even, lived in this dormitory as hero hopefuls rather than villain rejects, but in that world, the details are blurry and fragile, because it'd never work. No, this is the world they have, and this is the world they have to shape. Mina Ishido is not the girl she used to be, and to say otherwise would be dishonor on her. To say they're still kids is like looking at a diamond and saying it's still coal. It's an understandable conclusion to make, but one that's completely unfounded, regardless. They're kids built on thrones of broken glass, and some hero with a bleeding heart isn't going to change that. It does mean that Izuku will get to have some fun, though. He's rudely interrupted from his thoughts when there's a snap in front of his face, and Izuku turns to snap before he's met with Todoroki's piercing blue-gray gaze. He never snaps at Todoroki, if only because the boy can take as good as he can give, and it's infuriating. That's what happens when you're raised by villains, Izuku supposes. Thank you, Todoroki, Izuku says, instead of where the hell did you learn your manners? Was someone trying to get my attention? Todoroki offers him a blank stare. The better part of all the strangers in the room. Todoroki doesn't know everyone. It's a strange thing having allies in their line of work. Everyone knows everyone, or at least knows of them. It'd be insulting if they didn't. Todoroki may not know Ishido, but he knows of Acid Rain. Ishido may not know Todoroki, but she sure as hell knows of Frostburn, the villain responsible for putting Endeavor in the hospital with frostbite. So on and so on. Izuku offers a smile, taking inventory of who's in the common room. Todoroki, of course, and Bakugu's leaning over the back end of the other couch, suspiciously close to Kirishima. Shiro hasn't left Kirishima's side, and Shinsu's sitting on the ground with a cup of coffee and a bored look across his face. Yaoyorozu, Ida, Toga, and Uraraka are notably missing, but Izuku won't comment on it. I didn't expect Eraser to get you all here, he says simply, but it's the truth. It was his own half-baked idea to throw us, me, Todoroki, Kaken into you, and I agreed with the principal that he would extend the offer to you. You didn't have to accept it. There's some murmuring, but nothing's concretely spoken. Izuku wonders if they know why they agreed. It's Shiro that speaks, laid back and relaxing, but Izuku still notices the glint of an ankle monitor on his leg. It's true, they aren't to be trusted. They aren't to leave campus. Juvenile detention under another name. I know I didn't. Makes it easy though. No odd jobs, 3 square meals. And, sides, I never went to high school anyway. No way in hell I'm graduating in a year, he snorts. And oh shit. Kirishima must realize it at the exact same time as Izuku does, considering the way his eyes widen. I didn't go to high school either, and now that we're here. Bakugu, of course, has the gall to laugh at their misfortune. You dumbfucks are just realizing this? We're at a FNG high school, what did you think we were going to do here? Get the gold stamp of approval and then not have warrants for our arrest? Kaminari tries, but his eyes are wide and his head is thrown back against the couch cushion. It's understandable. Izuku never finished middle school, either, and he never assumed he'd go to high school. But now he's 17, and this means he's technically in his first year. They're going to graduate at age 20. Oh, dear FNG Lord. Now he's happy that he, at least, chose people he knew that were his very same age, since they're having the same FING crisis. Shiro groans again. This is totally your fault, Midoriya man. We're going to high school. Blame Eraserhead, Izuku says, and it hits a little hollowly, but that's alright. And for some reason, Kirishima laughs. And Kirishima's laugh is loud and boisterous, bright in a way that their profession never allows, and it's contagious. Izuku doesn't know why, but he breaks out in a fit of giggles, and soon enough, the common room is filled with the sounds of laughter, of Kirishima's loud laugh, of Izuku's restrained Izuku's, of Bakugu's loud snorts, and Shiro's quiet chuckles, of what can only be described as Kaminari's electric laugh. Even Ishido is laughing a little, and Izuku considers that a win. Shinso is still stone-faced, but that isn't anything new. I guess we're going through high school together, Izuku says, eventually, when it feels as though his lungs won't explode and his face doesn't feel as strange from the unfamiliar smile that had been across it. It's one hell of a way to start, isn't it? What do you mean, arson isn't the best way to start off an academic career? And, apparently, Todoroki's deadpan and blank face is exactly what they need. Because the giggles that had started to trail off came back full force, and even Shinso snorts into his coffee. Arson isn't something to laugh about, Todoroki says, again, as monotone as usual, but there's a smile playing at the edge of his lips. It's something to aspire for. That sounds like it'd, Kaminari starts, but he's smiling so widely that he has to stop in the middle of his sentence. It's completely illogical, it's not even actually funny, there's no reason to be laughing, but Izuku feels more relaxed than he has since he was 14. Be at the beginning of a recipe, you know? Where, like, the author gives you way too much info on their life story at the beginning. Except, in this case, it's like instructions on how to make a Molotov cocktail. Bakugu scoffs. Half and Half couldn't make a Molotov cocktail if he tried, he burned pasta by effendi looking at it. Well, Siro says, glancing at Todoroki's hands. What if you like? Poured liquor on his hands and then startled him. Wait, if we found some liquor, could we try that? Kaminari asks, his usual bright excitement back as he leans over the back of the couch to get closer to Todoroki, for some ungodly reason. Todoroki doesn't know what to do with the attention, that's for certain. He's confused but not shying away from it. If you can find alcohol, Shinso says, unimpressed, I will bash your skull in if you just pour it on his hands. Hand, Izuku corrects quietly, and that's it. That's all he contributes to the conversation. Instead, he leans back, he watches the way they banter, the way they seem to fit together. He'd feel bad about the others not being in the room if he couldn't hear the laughter from the kitchen. Izuku sits back, holds his lukewarm coffee with a semblance of a smile on his face, as the sun continues to rise. Maybe this was the right call. It's been a long time since he's been able to enjoy something like this, but only time will tell, he supposes. Maybe Aizawa was right. Right now, at this moment, Izuku can't look at any of the people in front of him and think murderer, thief, brawler. He thinks friends, and oh, isn't that a dangerous word? For around the first week, the program goes smoothly. Shud is able to get a decent night's sleep and he doesn't have to file incident paperwork and is able to conduct his usual ethics class, without trouble. Of course, all good things have to come to an end. He's been betting on it, so he isn't surprised. He's got a class of 9, all raised on the wrong side of the law with shaky morality at best, and they're all rather temperamental and emotion-driven. Logically, they make no sense. Because they're teenagers forced by circumstance into things they don't particularly understand. All things considered, they should have snapped sooner. It's the aftermath Shoyuta doesn't want to clean up, though. To say the dormitories are volatile is to say that fire is hot. It's a given, something intrinsically known, that you'd be stupid to think otherwise. A group of ragtag kids from the wrong side of the tracks, who've learned nothing but how to antagonize for years, aren't going to be best friends simply because they all have a mutual friend and the same status, villain, in a school full of hero hopefuls. That might have been what Aizawa intended for, but Izuku doesn't care for it much. He understands they won't get along, and he's done his damnedest to damage control. He makes sure Shinso and Bakugu aren't in the same room. He makes sure that Kirishima and Siro stay away from Mina. He makes sure that Toga and Todoroki don't happen to bond over murder or their mutual acquaintance. And while he likes acting like it in the field, he isn't God. Izuku can't predict everything, other than the chain of events that make the most sense. How was he supposed to know that Bakugu making hot chocolate in the kitchen was going to cause a blowout screaming match with Todoroki, of all people? Izuku's trying to damage control now too, but that means he's standing in the doorway to the kitchen and trying to make sure no one goes in and interrupts whatever's happening in there. It can't get too bad, because they aren't able to use their quirks, not with the monitors around their wrists. They get a nice shock if they try. Izuku would know because he's tried to get it off. If he unlatches the mechanism that sits over his pulse point, well, removing it is almost figured out. He's still working on it. Either way, if anyone gets in the middle of their argument, They'll be the next people on the chopping block, and while he can calm Todoroki down, it's easy. With soothing words and a careful touch to his shoulder, the physical contract is what he needs, and can stop Bakugo from going nuclear. It involves being alone for prolonged PRDS of time dash. There's nothing he can do against, say, Ida or Uraraka. It's annoying at best. Izuku has more behavior observations to make. I don't give a shit about your pride, icy hot. There's nothing left for you to dash. You can't speak of pride when you found yours in the gutter, broken beyond dash. Oh, that's rich, isn't that to say, weren't you dash? Your IQ is equal to dash. Enough. Izuku isn't quick enough to stop Shinso from walking into the kitchen. Since he'd been listening in to the fight to see what they were talking about, he still doesn't know, as their voices kept overlapping each other, louder and louder and louder. The pair look over to Shinso, who's holding a mug, always a mug, and a sweater that's certainly seen better days. The bags under his eyes are worse than when he arrived, but there's a somewhat healthy sheen to his skin, this time. With classes starting up, officially, in a couple of days, they haven't had much to do, and Shinsu's elected to stay to himself. On the other hand, Izuku's assumption about their group being quirkless, making them less volatile, was wrong, as Todoroki has a hold of Bakugo's shirt collar, and Bakugo's hands are wrapped around a glass that's certainly going to meet a violent end if his grip tightens any further. Todoroki glares, but Bakugo only snarls. At a stalemate as they are, no one is budging. Under Shinsu's heavy stare, Todoroki slowly releases Bakugo. Hope you know how petty you are, Peppermint Fresh, Shinso said slowly, like they were grade schoolers. Technically they are, but that's neither here nor there. It's a shame you waste it like this. Better than the way I used to waste my time, Todoroki snaps. His body is taut, ready to run or move at a moment's instance. His bracelet monitor keeps his quirk from activating, but the side effects are still there. The way the left side of his face is flushed a bright red, heat around him increasing, although barely. It's like a bomb, always waiting but never detonating. That's another good way to describe Bakugo, but he's still standing with his back pressed into the side of the counter, the glass still in his hands. He's snarling, jaw tensed and free hand shaking. But silent, blessedly silent. Shinso shrugs, as though the tension in the air is nothing to him other than cannon fodder. It might be, knowing him, an information broker deals with things far more difficult than a 17-year-old's unbridled rage. If Todoroki was still with the people that raised him, could still conjure his flames, he would be near invincible. I don't know, I liked you better when you spent your time bathed in blood. Todoroki snaps, again teeth bared. Cornered animal, how is Shinso doing that? Izuku always found it fascinating, the way Shinso knows how to push someone's buttons. It's easy for him to find the veins beneath the skin and tug at them, spill out old wounds and buried secrets like pouring a glass of water. It's his best skill and biggest vice. You don't know a DMN thing about blood, Todoroki says, voice laced in malice. Shut your mouth, just shut your mouth. Shinso swipes at nothing, returning his heavy gaze to Todoroki. I'll do no such thing. The Prince of High Hell, I know what you've done. You aren't him, so stop acting like it. I'm not Dash. If Bakugo hadn't shut his mouth, and he wouldn't have, because they're all well versed in the shouting and cursing that follows Katsuki Bakugo around like the plague, you would have punched him. He would have hit you with the glass, gone, or the throat. Then you're both bleeding, you're both bloody, and you still can't leave, so it's effing useless. Silence follows the declaration. Then, Shinso sighs, rubs at his temples after setting his mug on the counter. So get it together, would you? All this yelling is giving me a headache. While Shinso glares, Bakugo seems to be practically glowing at the bait, waiting to rise to it and make another mountain out of a molehill. It's the one thing he's good at inside of a fight, and that's exactly what he wants this to turn into. Todoroki, however, seems startled enough, set off enough, that he stares Shinso down with equally blank eyes, and walks away. His footsteps make no sound as he wants away, his boots too heavy for such a soundless endeavor. Practice makes perfect, Izuku supposes. And you, Shinso starts, gaze narrowing down on Bakugo. It's almost like his eyes glow, the air around him electric. It catches on Izuku's nerve endings, causes an electric jolt like a bad mood through his veins. Makes him want to fight, want to respond, even though he's the one Shinso is ignoring. It's a side effect of his quirk. And it's a very dangerous side effect. From what Izuku's been able to gather, it's easier for Shinso to gather information, but it's impossible for him to turn it off. Everyone around him is hardwired to antagonize. It must be lonely. Either way, Bokogu bares his teeth, a mimicry of Todoroki from earlier. Get off my D-eye bags, you weren't fucking involved in this in the first place. I wouldn't want to be on your D, even if I had the opportunity, Shinso said flatly. Don't pick fights you can't win. I can win anything, too. You say that, but you're the one backed into a corner. While Bakugu's body language is open, Izuku can still see the shake to his hands, the ones that are gripping the side of the counter and the glass, still. If he breaks that glass, his skin will be fine. Because of his quirk, his skin is more resilient, able to endure his blasts from years and years of calluses developing. Still, it makes Izuku nervous. This is verging into territory that's dangerous to bring up, dangerous to insinuate with Kaken. He's fragile, even if he says he isn't, even if he wants to prove that he isn't. Izuku's biggest strength is finding others' weaknesses, being able to provide them with strength from words, and being able to back it up with action. Able to burn away until his allies are like phoenixes rising from the ashes of who they used to be. Sometimes they get burned in the process and don't come back. There are some people that Izuku isn't able to save. Ashido, his mind hisses. Shinso, Ajui. Shinso grins, an ugly thing that exposes his canines. His teeth are pearly white, a testament to how he takes care of his voice. Anything that relates to his quirk, well. If Izuku's seen the scars crisscrossing the underside of his cheekbones, the thin lines embedded into the sides of his nose, well, he hasn't said anything about it, and Shinso hasn't volunteered any information. You're backed into a corner because it's the only thing you know how to do, Shinso continues. You're shaking like a leaf because you only see someone standing above you. Let me guess, Mommy Dearest didn't take too kindly to your attitude? You know, there's a fashion line dedicated to your death. Released it 2 months after your passing, must have been in the works for a while. Figures she'd think you'd kill yourself from stupidity before you accomplished anything. Bakugu isn't saying anything. Izuku can see the faraway look in his eyes, the way the rage is melting away into apathy. He's falling back into a shell that's hard to break him out of. The fed up part of Izuku, which is most of him, says it's a good thing. Katsuki Bakugu is many things, and rageful is his default setting. It's to hide all the insecurity, Izuku knows, but at some point, it doesn't matter. What matters is that his rage is his guard, and his guard is what holds the killing move. So stitch your DMN mouth shut. It's an easy enough instruction to follow, and Bakugu's mouth snaps shut. No one wants to hear it anyway, so knock it off. And so, Shinso walked away, picking his mug back up and sauntering out, like he hadn't spoken bad about Bakugu and gotten away without so much as a punch to the gut. Information brokers are dangerous things. Izuku walks away. Bakugu needs someone there for him, and that someone has never been Izuku. He's shown that time and time again, the times that Izuku's tried to help him and been rejected. It's not his job to help Bakugu anymore. Maybe, in another life, they would still be friends. Maybe Izuku would keep trying to reach out, but every time, he's gotten burned beyond repair. He only is who he is now because he stopped trying. Because he walked out of the hurricane and didn't turn back into the eye. Keep it quiet, Shinso mumbled as he walked past Izuku in the common room. Keep it quiet? It's no one's business but their own, Shinso says again, not even bothering to look up from the ground, gravity-defying purple hair now sticking to his forehead. With sweat, most likely, or maybe he'd showered. It's hard to tell, and Izuku doesn't want to know in the first place. It is when they're arguing in the kitchen. Shinso rolls his eyes. It is when they have an audience. And they don't, because there's nothing said that you didn't already know. Izuku nods, and that's the end of that. How are you holding up? Kaminari asks, sitting in class with a pencil jammed between his quirk and house arrest monitor. It won't disrupt it, of course. Kaminari's bracelet was specifically designed to stay on despite his electrokinesis. His electrokinesis is probably one of the most advanced electric quirks in the world when Izuku thinks about it. He's able to conduct 3 million volts of electricity without short-circuiting. The scars down his neck and arms are from overuse, so how much can he really conduct? Beyond that, how resilient is his body? Electricity runs hot, with lightning reaching 50,000 degrees Fahrenheit. It wouldn't be a shock if Kaminari was immune to Bakugo's blasts or Todoroki's fire, which would explain his pleasant disposition when it comes to the two of them. What do you mean? Izuku asks, mumbling with his tongue sticking slightly out, dull pencil digging into the notebook paper in front of him. Kaminari's right in front of him, so H can take notes, at least, about the side effects of said quirk. It's a strange thing, that in and of itself. Eraserhead's quirk nullifies any quirk, side effects and all. That's why he doesn't usually erase quirks that keep the user alive for long PRDS of time, at least. But quirk nullification, the bracelets they're wearing, they don't nullify side effects. Strange. Kaminari shrugs, sitting on the back of his chair. With all of us. Kaken and Todoroki got into a fight in the kitchen, didn't they? Weren't you there? I don't know what they were fighting about, and it wasn't that bad. It's no one's business but their own, Izuku thinks, Shinsu's voice like a ghost in his head. Maybe that's another side effect. Yeah, but it must be stressful. I don't like being all hidden away here, you know? No, I don't know. Kaminari shrugs. It's unnerving. Being stuck here. With the heroes. We're all gathered in one place, and I don't know about you. Actually, I do know about you. I know that you've made more than a couple of enemies, and now most people's hit lists are all gathered in one school. That's a valid concern, actually. Izuku's eyebrows furrow together when he thinks about it. He has made a lot of enemies. Shudo. Izuku doesn't like to think of Todoroki's given name, they aren't close enough for that. He still hasn't been able to bring down any of Todoroki's walls. It isn't his to know, but he can't help it, the concern that slips into the thought. Todoroki's stuck here with them with a group of known villains. Todoroki's in UA's off-the-book programs, and they aren't allowed to leave. If they aren't allowed to leave, and if they try, well, if they're attacked, they still can't leave. If Dabi manages to find this place, Todoroki is screwed. Izuku hasn't been able to find a way to get the bracelets off yet, and while Todoroki's a formidable opponent without his quirk, he's not on Dabi's level. Oh, God F. This is bad. Dabi, the League, Endeavor, Mitsuki, Kirishima and Siro and Ishido's old bosses. Yayarosa's old business partners. The people Uraraka's stolen from. Ida's enemies from when he'd been in Hosu. Shinsu's contacts, if they think he's turned over any secrets. He needs to talk to Aizawa. They're all walking targets. Indeed, of voicing any of these thoughts, Izuku mimics Kaminari's shrug. We're all more than capable of fighting, aren't we? It's in our nature. Kaminari hums, not quite as convinced as Izuku wants him to be. It's because he can tell that Izuku doesn't believe what he's saying either. I suppose. I wouldn't worry about it, UA's got a top-notch security program. Took me a good 3 hours to crack. And you're electrokinetic? What about a technopath? Izuku says, wondering out loud. Kaminari's eyes widen, but Izuku doesn't get the chance to ask about it before the bell rings for class, and Cementos walks into the room and holds his hand up for silence. Having pro-heroes as teachers leave much to be desired. Izuku's more than certain that almost none of them actually have a teaching degree. Izuku finds Aizawa in the teacher's den, sitting curled up in half of a sleeping bag with 3 empty cups of coffee on his desk, staring at a paper with more red marks on it than ink. The dry eye is more than obvious. Izuku would feel bad about interrupting the nap that Aizawa's surely going to fall into if it wasn't so pressing. Eraser, Izuku says, slamming his hands onto the man's desk and watching him JRK fully awake, ready and prepared to fight at a moment's hesitation. Truly, the years working as a pro have paid off, but Izuku's quicker, jumping back and out of arm's length. Midoriya, Aizawa says shortly like he isn't surprised in the slightest to see Izuku here. Good, he shouldn't be. He should know. He should know so he can protect them. He's a hero, he's an adult, and maybe some part of Izuku is still holding on to the idea that heroes can be good. That not all heroes are two-timed and two-faced. When Izuku thinks about that, though, the image of blonde hair and sunken eyes flashes before his face, green lightning unwillingly flickering across his arms, and so Izuku tries not to dwell. Protection, Izuku says simply. We need it. Your plan for it is. My plan for your protection? Aizawa blinks at him. It isn't the stupidest thing to say, contrary to what that look on Aizawa's face says. Yes. No way he's backing down from this now. Now that Kaminari's brought the concern up, it isn't leaving Izuku's mind, his mind practically vibrating at all the possibilities. You may be a pro-hero, but we've got powerful enemies. There's no way to tell who will show up when. By keeping us here and restrained, you're leaving us as little more than targets. You aren't targets. UA is heavily fortified and it's been kept out of the public eye, this program, and let alone your identities. What makes you think there's anything to protect you from? You don't know our pasts, Izuku wants to scream. You don't know our scars, you don't know what makes us paralyzed. You don't know. Inside, what he says is simple, a grin pulling wide across his face. Familiar from all the years he's faked it. He hasn't genuinely smiled since he was a child. Eraser, don't you dare think we're children. We're not your pet project, we're Dash. You're my students. The look in Aizawa's eyes is cold, leaving no room for anything other than what he thought was the cold, hard truth. They're a group of villains I wrote down on a piece of paper that doesn't make them anything other than criminals. It's not true, it isn't true, but mind games are one kind of torture that trumps any other. Aizawa has a strong sense of empathy, especially for kids sent down a dark path. Izuku had done research into the man before he'd been caught, if only because he wanted to know who was in charge of his case. The sense came, most likely, from the death of Oboro Surakumo, who died in a building collapse during their second year of high school. He'd only been 16. No wonder Aizawa wants to save them. He isn't seeing them, he's seeing the ghost of someone who died a long time ago. He isn't seeing Izuku Midoriya, he's thinking about a kid that could die in a line of work that he was never meant to go into. And maybe that view isn't wrong, but Izuku isn't a child, not anymore. Aizawa's lips purse into a thin, tight line. And regardless, you'll still be protected. As I said, there's no one that gets in or out of UA without my knowledge of it. Kaminari got in without trouble. That, of course, has Aizawa's silence. Because it's true, because Kaminari was able to bypass UA's security and he's a 17-year-old hacker with minimal experience. Kaminari was able to get into UA without more than a week's planning, and he was here for positive intent. What do you think will happen when villains find out where we are? I thought you considered yourselves villains. We do, because we are, Izuku grimaces, but we're the kind that has a cause beyond destruction, beyond repair. Shoyuta Aizawa, have you ever man that cares for nothing more than destruction? Yes, the whispered, unspoken answer sits heavily between them, news flashes of Kamino Ward flashing through their minds. Izuku knows, remembers watching from the floor of an abandoned apartment with a shitty old TV lugged in. Watched as Katsuki Bakugu supposedly died in action, 2 punctured lungs killing him on the spot. Watching as All Might, powerless, with his power now running through Izuku's veins, died to stop a man that just barely went down. It's your turn now. Izuku was a child. Izuku was a child, and he was given the responsibility of a man in the grave for a life that he gave so much to, only to get nothing in return. Why would Izuku want that? Why would Izuku ever want that? He didn't go to UA for a reason, and after that, it was cemented. Slowly, Aizawa speaks, although his words are cherry-picked and it's obvious that he's tiptoeing around the subject matter. Midoriya, I'm going to need you to tell me who you think is going to be after you and your class. He doesn't say, you and your friends, and it's for good reason. They aren't friends. They're a class, and they're now bound together for the next 3 years, if they manage or are legally capable of graduating, and it's all on Izuku's whim, on his half-written word. The thought sort of makes him drunk on power, but that's a dangerous state of being. Izuku's learned his lesson by watching from others' mistakes, Drunk on Power is one that both Todoroki and Bakugo can write an autobiography on. At Aizawa's request, he can only nod. And so, Aizawa continues. And I'd like to know how you met all the individuals you've chosen to bring into the program. They sit in an interrogation room that UA shouldn't have on its campus. Izuku isn't handcuffed this time, but he might as well be, staring at the blank, gray walls, at the man in front of him providing the only visual STMLTN in the room. Aizawa looks as roughy as usual, but the bags under his eyes are getting worse, and that's most likely because of the problem class he's chosen to instate. He's made his bed, now he'll lie in it. Izuku hums. So you want to know how I met everyone, huh? That's a tall order, you know. Somehow, I think you'll manage it. That startles a laugh out of Izuku, and they get to it. It's simple, really, just tell the story, and their enemies and Aizawa will make sure they come up with new defenses to combat all that. I met Todoroki when he was 14. He'd run away from home, after finally snapping and putting Endeavor in the hospital for something that happened at home. He still won't tell me, and he was terrified that he'd killed him, or that he would continue to kill. Still, we lost contact for a couple of years. Last I heard before we reconnected, he'd been running in the same circles as Dabi. There's still a hit list out for him. That was a lie. Izuku met Todoroki when they were both 14, sure, but the boy had been raised by Dabi, ever since the man had nearly burned up and took Todoroki with him. The Todoroki that Izuku met that day had come back to the Todoroki residence to prove his worth and slaughter the so-called hero, but he could only give him frostbite. He'd never killed before. And while he would kill in the future, he was still just a child, and Dabi hadn't taken kindly to Shudo's failure. They saved each other, in a way. I met Tenya Ida on a job in Hosu. Ida was working on a child trafficking ring that was slowly snaring into Hosu, and I was trying to hunt down an arms dealer that had been evading me for a couple of months due to some fraudulent purchases that never went through. When we both found the same link, a woman named Nevermore Dash, we teamed up to take her down. Incorrect. Izuku met Tenya Ida in Hosu at a bar he'd gone to make a deal with the club owner about the drags she sold in her club. Still, Nevermore is still after Ida, and has been for a year or so. Uraraka was a special case. I met her when she was trying to steal from Yaoyorozu. It was during a meeting and she never would have been caught had I not been there and needed to go to the bathroom. I didn't want her to get into trouble, especially not with a girl like Yaoyorozu, so I helped her. She said she'd pay me back with any favor I asked for within reason, and soon enough I had to cash it in. Uraraka had agreed to one favor. Izuku called it in when Bakugo was bleeding out on the couch of an abandoned warehouse and they didn't know any first aid for someone whose sweat was explosive. Through all of these, of course, Aizawa is giving his slight hums of acknowledgement, writing it all down in some yellowed notebook of his. Certainly not better than Izuku could write it. Shinso was an information broker, what more can I say? I needed information, and I followed the grapevine to him. He drives a hard bargain, and he's incredibly difficult to reason with, so I kept coming back and back to figure out what made him that way. I couldn't, and he eventually forced me to stop prying. But Izuku had found Shinso through the grapevine, but their little petty feud only ended when they got the same amount of blackmail on each other. A shame that Izuku's still an empath, even after all the time he spent trying to stifle it, so he still sympathizes a little too much to use any of the blackmail. A dangerous bluff with an information broker. I was one of Toga's targets. She was meant to assassinate me for a pretty payout, but she caught me in the middle of a job. I don't remember why, but I was covered in blood, and she liked that. From then on I was Aizachan, and if I said jump, she asked how high. I don't, for obvious reasons. But I could. True, and still one of the most traumatizing experiences of his life, and he's got blood on his hands. Metaphorically, because Toga loves when he's covered in blood and so he tries to keep it off his body, now. She's a fine girl, really, it's just something about her quirk and suppression and all that. When I met Yaoyorozu, it was through Shinso, and Shinso referred me to her because she was the best arms dealer around. Truly, far better than the alternatives. She referred me to a couple of smaller dealers she knew that I could buy out because a new player is good for business on her end and she's never one to stop a gang war. Really, I think she likes playing games. And then, Izuku sighs, eyes downcast. I met Ishido, Shiro, and Kirishima at the same time. They were all bodyguards at the same club, but they were all edging towards something darker and darker, so I thought I could help them. The club they worked at was very involved in the mob, and they were working to pay off their debts. But some of their patrons were very, very creepy, so I thought that maybe teaching Ishido how to defend herself in more lethal ways than she knew now would help her out. It was only about a week later that I learned that she burned out man's eyes because he tried. I don't know. I don't think that's extreme, except for the fact that the man survived the burns. Shiro and Kirishima thought it was too far, and they went their separate ways after that. That's about when acid rain popped up, when Shiro started taking more undercover jobs I could offer him, and Kirishima changed his look up to try and hide his past, I think. Wow. He didn't like thinking about that one. It's not like a word he said wasn't true, of course. The only problem is that he'd left a few details out, but there are some things that Aizawa shouldn't get to know. And, well, Kaminari found me. You know how he is? He's got the intuition that you need to trust, and he's strangely smart once you give him a specific task to do. Aizawa raises his brow. What about Bakugu? What about Kaken? It isn't clicking in Izuku's head until he realizes and rolls his eyes. Oh, Kaken. I've known Kaken since I was a child. He's the reason I'm like this, you know? Or at least part of it. Helped me open my eyes to how blind hero society is. And hey, maybe without me, he'd be a hero like the rest of you. When Aizawa mumbles, Izuku doesn't hear him right. There's no way he can hear him right. I don't think you want anything other than being the right hero. If there's anything Izuku's learned to hate since enrolling in UA's program, it's being right. You might think that's counterproductive, that being right is never a bad thing. The problem lies in when Izuku's paranoia reminds him that he's in the middle of a hero school, heroes, who have always been enemy number one, and a concentrated number of wanted criminals are gathered in the same place. UA might be keeping them under lock and key, but that doesn't mean there can't be a leak. And Izuku's right. He knows he's right when he's sitting in his dorm room, and an explosion rocks the very foundation. The barred window on the far side of his room shatters. Two things. There's an attack, and Kaken got his bracelet off, run through Izuku's head in the time it takes for him to set his book down and stand, already swinging out of the open door to find the source of the commotion. They're wanted criminals being controlled by the bracelets around their wrists, keeping their quirks in line. If Kaken got his off, well, that'd be some nice trivia to know. When Izuku makes it down the stairs, like hell he's going to take the elevator when he doesn't know what's happening, he's greeted with the sight and stench of smoke filtering around the common room in a swirling haze. There are figures moving through it, slow and methodical, and Bakugu is nowhere to be seen. It's instinct to put his arms up, to put his hands into fists and glance around. He's never been the best at physical combat, his quirk too difficult to handle. One for all is a powerful thing, but it's not the only DMN worthwhile thing about him. He doesn't care about what All Might thinks. One for all is not all there is to Izuku Midoriya, and so he uses it as little as possible. It's deadly to the average person after all. No one told me this was a DMN daycare. A voice drawls, and Izuku feels the room drop in temperature. When the room drops in temperature, it means only one thing: Todoroki's here. Todoroki's here, and if Todoroki's panicking, that means Dubby's here. Izuku swallows, takes another moment to wonder how the hell they got their bracelets off, and instead focuses on the smoke, sees the glow emanating from a single figure. That must be Dabi. Then he's rather infamous in the underground. He's rather infamous to Izuku because he's the one who caused so much FING damage that Izuku's still picking up the pieces. Or maybe that's just Todoroki's chill getting under his skin again. Wouldn't be the first time. No one told me visiting hours were open, Todoroki quips back, but there's a shake to his voice, one that's obvious to Izuku. And to Dabi. He's afraid. He's afraid, because he's found solace in the eye of the storm, and Dabi's here to drag him back to the center of the inferno. A column of blue breaks through the smoke, enough so that Izuku's already rushing toward the source before he has a chance to think it through. They don't have gear, they don't have alarms, and he doesn't even have his quirk right now if he wanted it, and the psychological aspect of it is all F-ed. Izuku's fist connects with Dabi's sternum, but the man barely doubles over before a heated palm is headed straight toward Izuku's face. There's no time to do anything other than duck, pivoting on his heel and throwing a leg out to swipe Dabi's legs out from under him. That's the thing about Dabi, from what Izuku's observed. His quirk is perfect for long-range or short-range combat, but he isn't nearly as agile as Todoroki. Not to say he isn't good, because Izuku grits his teeth when nails rake across his back and slice through fabric and skin with ease, leaving only the smell of burning plastic as he darts out of the way. Dabi's focus is entirely on Todoroki. Dabi wants Todoroki, wants him to pay but wants him back on their side. Wants him dead, but not injured enough that he can't be useful. It's a strange relationship the two of them have, Izuku thinks, standing against a pillar in the common room and breathing through the pain in his back. Bakugo would never let it go if he screamed about a silly little burn. Where the hell is Bakugo, anyway? Now that the smoke's clearing out of the air, Izuku's head is ringing for an entirely different reason, but he doesn't see Bakugo or the others at all. Just him, Todoroki, and Dabi. They've been separated. The thought doesn't make Izuku worry. He's seen blood, so much blood fall at the hands of the people stuck here with him. The only one that might have a hard time is Kaminari, but he's not above putting a man into shock for the hell of it, let alone because there's a serious problem. Dabi isn't working alone, then, who is he working with? When Izuku looks back to the people in front of him, the standoff, Dabi's standing there, 10 feet away, and Todoroki's entire right side is engulfed in ice. It's so cold that his cheeks are turning red from it, eyes watering, and there's a tremor to his hands that only come from quirk overuse. He's panicking. Izuku has to step in. He knows that. And he tries to move, but the burns across his back screech in protest and he ends up leaning all his weight on the pillar. He needs the adrenaline to push past it. Damn it, how did he break his bones so goddamn often? This isn't even a broken bone and it hurts like a beach. He must be getting lazy or something. And so, Izuku grits his teeth again, pushes off the pillar, and ignores the stars dancing in his vision. Because Dabi's so focused on Todoroki, he's barely paid any attention to Izuku, no doubt assuming the burn will put him out of commission. Who would for anyone else? Hey! Izuku calls, knowing that the momentary distraction will do nothing to help the situation at hand. Still, when Dabi looks over, turquoise eyes burning with rage, it does what it was intended. The focus and the heat are all on him. A spike of adrenaline rushes through Izuku's veins, and suddenly he isn't thinking so hard about how much his back hurts, or about how he can't find anyone else, or how Dabi isn't opposed to putting Todoroki on the brink of death. Dabi grins, persistent, aren't you? I see why the replacement likes you. Shame. Well, Izuku isn't going to parse through all that. Instead, he focuses. He needs to get Dabi away from Todoroki. In full, he needs to get the villain incapacitated, but for now, putting space between them will work. Todoroki's quirk is perfect to cool him down, but it won't be possible if Dabi's in his head, and he is. Space. They need space. It'd be super FING helpful to have the speed one for all gave him right about now. That's a shame. For a moment, a single moment, everything is calm. The smoke's filtered out of the common room, revealing broken windows and a ringing silence. Dabi stands in the middle of the two, Izuku with his fists held up and Todoroki stock still, feet rooted to the ground and a faraway look in his eyes, shaking. The next moment, a scream pierces the air. Izuku will have to figure out who's screaming. But he uses that second to burst forward, ducking under the column of flames that flare in his general direction, between Todoroki and Dabi, between them. When Dabi turns, Izuku huffs at the momentary spike of pain in his back, waiting for the column of flame to find him there. Izuku runs in close, lets the flames melt the bracelet on his wrist. It burns, it burns. It burns badly enough that Izuku wants to take his whole diamond hand off as the metal heats, as the plastic components melt, but the effect is immediate. The green lighting Izuku's become accustomed to flashes all over his body, a drag of its own, the kind that numbs out everything else, other than power. It's a dangerous drag indeed. Izuku Midoriya is more than one for all. And when he uses it to deck Dabi across the face, grabbing him by the hair and using it to knee him in the face hard enough to break his nose into at least 3 pieces, well, Shudo Todoroki is more than his past, too. Todoroki is always going to be more than his blood, but it's a crying shame no one else seems to realize that. Be it Endeavor or Dabi. Come on, Izuka murmurs, breathing hard. When he stares at Dabi's crumpled form, on the ground with blood pouring out from where his nose is broken, he doesn't think intimidating. He doesn't think this is the man that's caused Todoroki so much pain. He doesn't think of the fact that Todoroki was so frozen in place that he didn't try to defend himself. He thinks of a sad, pathetic man looking for revenge in the wrong person and the faded burn scars around Todoroki's throat. Let's go find Bakugo, Todoroki finishes for Izuku, voice thick and raspy with emotion that he'll never be able to place. They move on. I told you to die already. Katsuki screams at the 1, 2, 3 doubles that disappear in liquid mush every time he blasts them to hell and back. From behind him, back to back as Kirishima should be, as he hasn't been for months, Kirishima grins. You know, if you take out the head of the Hydra, you're using that metaphor wrong, dumbass. Kirishima huffs as he uses hardened fingertips to slice through the face of a double. Mud coats his hands, but it's effective. It's better than blood. Katsuki would like to say they've never been back-to-back with blood pooling between them, coating their hands, but that would be a lie. Besides, so long as the both of them come out alive, he doesn't give a shit what happens to the dipshits that dared cross him. He's Katsuki Fang Bakugo, alive and kicking, DMN whatever the world thinks of him. They're fighting doubles of the lizard fucker, Spinner, isn't that his name? Yeah, one of the league's lapdogs. One of All for One's old lapdogs, though Katsuki sincerely doubts anyone other than that goddamn flimsy excuse for burnt plastic wants to be here. If he sees flashes of Kamino, of a hand wrapping around his neck, of suffocation, well, that's no one's business other than his own. You know, man, Kirishima starts conversationally before a claw reaches through the ring around them and nicks his stomach. There's a hiss, and then a grunted, 24, before Katsuki furthers his crouch and Kirishima flips off his back. When he does so, it leaves mud across Katsuki's shirt, god damn it, but it has its intended use, allowing Kirishima to land on the doubles and snap a couple of necks. He'd feel bad if they were real people, which Katsuki thinks is stupid as shit. If someone else has no qualms killing him, why should he care about killing them? Double standards. He isn't here for that shit. Anyway, Kirishima huffs, as Katsuki elbows a double in the face. It's been a while. We haven't really had a chance to talk. No shit, if you hadn't taken that undercover assignment dash. I didn't really have a choice, you know dash. There's always a FNG choice. Katsuki shouts, far louder than intended, but maybe it's drowned out by the explosion that burns from his palm. He hates that it's been stifled at UA for so long. He remembers being at UA, before Kamino. They sure as hell treat this reform program like juvie, but that's neither here nor there, is it? He's had the DMN bracelet on for so long that his calluses are starting to fade. And that means his explosions burn, more than they used to. It's annoying. Kirishima sighs dramatically, shifting his foot so that his calf grazes Katsuki's signal, and Katsuki dutifully shifts, so that they're now on opposite sides. It's getting hard to walk with all the muck around them, sticking Katsuki's boots to the ground and making it hard to maneuver. Look, I didn't want to take the job. FNG bullshit. I know you did. Katsuki knows Kirishima wanted the job, but he doesn't know why, and maybe that's why it stings so much. Or maybe that's the claw marks that are currently marring Katsuki's shoulder. When did he get those? Lizards. It was close to home, what do you want me to say? Kirishima punctuates his sentence by slicing his arm out, an arc as always, but he pivots on his heel and stares at Katsuki, red eyes piercing and unyielding. He doesn't have any doubles around him. That I wanted to go home? That kicking butt and living in abandoned apartments isn't the same as listening to my mama tell me about her day? That not everyone wants to forget who they were before you fed them over. Katsuki can't say anything. All his attention is on Kirishima, on the heaving of his chest, on the feral look in his eyes that isn't leaving. Kirishima shakes his head. Katsuki doesn't even know when the last double disappeared, just that Kirishima, 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 I drew. It's been so long since they've been able to fight like this, been even longer since they've had a fight. Home is where the heart is, Kirishima continues, swallowing, Adam's apple bobbing as he talks, frantically glancing between Katsuki and the muck on the ground. And just because yours is on a battlefield doesn't mean mine is too. I want to go home, Bakugo, and I can't. So I'm sorry that getting to pretend I was going home meant that I left you, but I can't do this forever. I'm sorry you got hurt, I didn't mean for that, but I needed something that's just me and not you. With that, Kirishima's gaze is back on him, heavy, waiting, but Katsuki doesn't. There's a proper answer there, but whatever it is, he doesn't know it. So he avoids it. Katsuki doesn't meet his eyes. Let's find Tape Arms and the others. These doubles didn't stop fucking appearing for no reason. Kirishima simply shakes his head, and the tension in the air is too thick to cut through with any small talk that Katsuki doesn't want to make anyway. You know, Ashido, Hitoshi drawls. This would go a lot quicker if you just made things a little more acidic. F you, she spits, glancing over at Hitoshi, who's sitting on his butt. In fact, he's sitting on a bar stool that came from God knows where but was sitting on the patio when he got out here. His legs are pulled up, arms wrapped around them. Ashido, on the other hand, is sweating and doing a hell of a lot of physical activity that seems draining, just watching. She's fighting some 2-bit villains that seemingly decided they'd throw their lot in with the League for some god-awful reason. Perhaps they'll be dead by sunset. I hate to tell you this, but I'm certainly not into you like that. Watching this is entertaining. And sure, it's a douchebag move, sitting here while she does all the work, but in Hitoshi's defense, Ashido needs to burn off some of her anger and Hitoshi doesn't want to get caught in the crossfire, she doesn't work well on a team, and he doesn't want chemical burns, thank you very much. Sure, he's capable of helping, but why help when all that is going on? Does the trick. The moment after Hitoshi makes his comment, Ashido's acid goes from a transparent white to pink. He doesn't know what happens, chemically, or if acid is ever supposed to be pink, but he knows that when it does, it means Ashido's set off and planning on melting through steel. It's a good thing, being an information broker. He gets to know everything about everyone and lets the world play out like it's his stage. It isn't how he'd chose to live his life had he gotten the opportunity, but it isn't the worst thing. At least he isn't the poor saps that scream as their bones melt at the joints. Their screams are annoying. You could at least melt their vocal cords first, Hitoshi adds conversationally. Ashido, on the other hand, seems more relaxed than she has since they moved in. That's good, since he, too, wants to keep from being a puddle of Hitoshi-colored goop. Oh, F you. You said that already. And I mean it just as much. I told them UA was safe. Shoyuta drawls, glancing out the window at the destruction across UA's campus. By all means, it isn't the worst, but the implications were frightening. Villains broke into UA, and they went straight for the reform program. They didn't bother with the Hero Corps students. All they wanted, it seems, was the reform kids. They wanted the reform kids and managed to do absolutely nothing to them, save for the injuries that make Aizawa want to vomit. The metal and plastic quirk nullificator melted to Midoriya's bone, the burns across his back with blisters forming in a grotesque yellow. The distant, gone look in Todoroki's eyes, like he wasn't here, but somewhere far, far away. The gashes across Bakugo and Kirishima, who both seemed to think it was no big deal. In fact, all of them seemed to think it was no big deal. Shoyuta had to call a cleanup crew to get rid of the corpses of 2 low-rank villains that Ashido killed. That she murdered, and they didn't seem to think much of it. Now, Shoyuta knows self-defense. He knows she very well could have incapacitated them without killing them. He knows they aren't model kids, that lives weren't the easiest, that they had to do some F-ed-up things. But it's his first time seeing it up close and personal, and it's bad. All the injured, of course, were sent to Recovery Girl, and Netsu had requested Shoyuta to follow him to the creature's office, so they could watch the recorded footage of the events. It's still a mystery as to how the villains got onto campus, but it's very clear they have a single leader. It's Dabi and no one else. If anything, the man seems mad, rapid on something Shoyuta can't place. He's acting recklessly and out of mind, a plan that was halfway thought through before rage took hold. He knew where to find Todoroki. He knew to distract everyone else on the ground level. There's no footage of what Ida, Uraraka, Toga, Shiro, and Kaminari did during the attack. Shuda's inclined to think that's Kaminari's work. He's hiding something. What did they do? This is a one-off attack. Nedza continues, staring at the screen with that DMN cheerful smile on his face. It's out of place in such a drab office. Shoyuda standing to the side of the desk. You can tell because it's half-baked. The League would never plan anything so boring, don't you think? To go after a single student? On campus, no less. Shoyuda waits for the continued explanation because he knows he's going to get it. And he does, unsurprisingly. It's Dabi's plan because clearly Shigaraki wasn't here for it. They all respect him as a leader, that's been shown plenty of times before. You know, it's been long theorized at the commission that Dabi and Todoroki Shudo was in leagues with each other, back when the scandal truly hit that Todoroki had sent his elder to the hospital and disappeared. Yes it is. Shoyuda hums. That was part of the commission's file on Todoroki, that he was most likely working with Dabi, given that Dabi was another fire user and one that seemed to have a grudge against Endeavor, specifically. There were some theories to his identity, but Shoyuda had never paid them much mind. That wasn't part of his case, and so he wasn't going to waste time when he could be tracking the villain down. Watching the video footage in front of him, Todoroki looks terrified, Shoyuda notes, squinting just slightly. Izuku incapacitates Dabi, Todoroki barely moves. Indeed, Nedza says. It's like he's seeing a ghost. Or his past back to haunt him. But that's neither here nor there. Nedza says, and what? Shuda's more than inclined to disagree, but he knows better than to interrupt. Nedzu and he go far back, sure, and this is just a fact of life. Don't interrupt. They put up quite a fight, don't you think? Even managed to get their nullificators off. How'd they do that anyway? Nedza hums. Truly, the only one to remove their bans were Midoriya and, originally, Uraraka. Uraraka managed to remove Kaminari's, and so on and so forth. I simply deactivated the others when I realized what was happening. Shoyuda does not sigh, although he very much wants to. And what's your point? They're impressive, if misguided, kids. We've been over that before, there's no need to do so again. They're impressive, Nedzu echoes, as though that's supposed to make Shoyuda understand his point. The creature turns to the screen again, bringing up the roster list with each of the kids, quite frankly, terrible mugshots. And we're the best hero school in the nation. Shoyuda understands now, and he immediately tries damage control. No, Nedzu. The program is to reintegrate them into society, to get the charges they've had dropped. Nedzu absolutely grins, dragging a clip to the screen, one of Kirishima and Bakugu, back to back, right before they moved into a blind zone and, presumably, met up with Kaminari and the others. They fight well, organized, and methodical. The commission will of course demand they serve some sentence, reintegrated or not. Community service seems the most passable, no? They've already had hard lives, dash. And this is what they've hardwired themselves for. God, Shoyuda hates this DMN principle so much, sometimes. He can't deny that it would be an interesting class, watching the clip play out. It seems the pair are arguing, but it isn't getting in the way of the violence they seem accustomed to. Fighting, battles. This is what they're used to, isn't it? Eraser? No matter what you teach them, this is what they know to do. If someone hits them, hit back harder. The CY never ends after that, Nedzu. The CY seal. Heroes and villains and civilians in the crossfire. Underworlds and coffins in hell. Violence, violence, violence. Shoyuda can't say he's not part of that CYCL. He's a hero, he has deaths under his belt, people he couldn't save. People he went after and put into a grave, the one they never speak of, Hizashi and him. Nedzu nods, understanding and yet uncaring. This'll be the last of this discussion, I'm afraid. Your reform program will need a new name. I'm thinking Class X. Doesn't that have a nice ring to it? Wouldn't it be V for villain? Nedzu shakes his head. No. X for outcast. I trust you, Eraser, they'll be great heroes. Not if they despise heroes more than they despise being kept here, Shoyuta thinks, and says nothing more on the matter as he gives the creature a nod and steps out of the office as quickly as he can. Todoroki, Uraraka says easily, contradictory to the queasy feeling in Izuku's stomach that refuses to leave no matter what he does. He's been on edge since the attack. While they handled it well and they can do so again, it doesn't change the fact that they were attacked in a place where they were supposed to be safe and Aizawa hasn't approached them with a debrief or even questioned them or accused them of leaking information. It implies that the police weren't informed of the attack, and that implies that the reform program is simply under the radar. It doesn't surprise Izuku, of course it doesn't, but it's still shaking the little faith that he had in the first place. What did he expect? Half of them are wanted criminals and the other half are legally dead. There's no way to keep their identities out of the news to get the reform program officially sanctioned by the Hero Commission and the government at large. It's an over-exaggeration to think they're two separate things. What is it? Todoroki's words are clipped and sharp, though his expression shows none of the bitterness behind his voice. He's always cold, Izuku would say. It's hard to figure out whether it's ice cold or just a cool frost that covers every wall he's ever built. But Izuku's been told time and time again that he analyzes too often, so he blinks and snaps himself out of it before he can think about Todoroki too much. God, he needs to stop analyzing. Or he needs to find his notebooks. He wishes he could just analyze quirks. Nowadays it's quirks and people and too much to keep logical track of, though he tries his best. Uraraka hums, reaching into the fridge to grab a container of leftover white rice that she's probably going to eat cold because she never likes heating it up. It's strange, but she hasn't said anything about the way Izuku eats cold pizza, so he'll let it slide. Fair is fair. That attack, it seemed centered on you, didn't it? I have no clue what you're talking about. Still, Todoroki's voice is strained, and while the boy can lie, and can lie well, it's clear he hasn't had enough time to process what's happened and what may still happen. It's still shaking him up, from the way his fingertips are white against the countertop, as though that'll help the no-doubt turning of his stomach. Uraraka narrows her eyes, closes the fridge door with a bit more force than necessary, and turns her gaze on Todoroki. Lying is a sin, you know. So is stealing precious jewels, but I see you haven't gone to hell yet. I'm not trying to argue with you, she says, and Izuku sincerely doubts that. That's the entire reason he's still standing in the kitchen. He's the only one able to damage control if it comes to that. With the way Todoroki looks, his expression flickering between entirely passive and entirely too upset, pent-up aggression and melancholy warring, Izuku probably will. I'm just saying. That villain, Tebi, his name is, I believe. He was after you, wasn't he? You weren't there, so you wouldn't know. That much was true. Uraraka wasn't with Todoroki and Izuku during the attack, she was somewhere else. Izuku's rather certain she was with Kaminari and them, but he doesn't know for certain. And he should interrupt. Izuku opens his mouth before he recognizes what he's doing. Let's break it up now. We can all be targets. It just happens that Dabi was most interested in Todoroki. I'm not trying to argue about it, she insists again, and while sincerity paints her words, Izuku's been a pessimist since he was 13 and can't say he believes it. I'm just saying. It was strange. When Izuku struggles to form a good argument, Todoroki, still silent from across the kitchen, a hand grips his shoulder so tightly and so suddenly that Izuku's entire body tenses before a warm breath sounds, right next to his neck, and that's Toga. Interesting, considering she rarely comes out of her room, doesn't like leaving when she doesn't know who she's with. Her fangs are barely touching Izuku's shirt collar, her nails dug into his shirt. She's touch-starved, and so Izuku will allow it. Oh, Dabi? He was just looking for his replacement, I think he used to say. Todoroki winces from across the room. What do you know about what he used to say? I used to run with them, you know. Toga shrugs, her tongue flicking across the skin of Izuku's neck. It isn't a pleasant feeling, but it isn't entirely annoying either. It's something he's gotten used to in the time he's known her. The League. Can't say it was quite my style after some staffing changes, but it was nice while it lasted. Dabi was an obsessive. I never really got to know him. Because he was an obsessive or because you didn't want to? Izuku has to ask, if only because Toga won't specify the difference. And when you deal in information like Izuku, it pays to know the little details. He's a lot like Shinso in that way. Knowledge is power and power is money. Got tired of hearing him whine about endeavor this, endeavor that. Whenever the poor hero was brought up, Dabi would light up like a forest fire, and there was no way to shut it down. Eventually, Tamura and I stopped talking about the dude entirely. Todoroki's lip is upturned into a sneer, if the subtle expression change can even be considered that. Not everyone is used to reading body language like Izuku is. Even though he is still used to more expressive types, like Katsuki Bakugo and how he wears his heart on his sleeve if you know where to look. Endeavor has nothing to do with Dabi's replacement. That is an entirely different beast. Uraraka raised a brow. Please do tell. No. It wasn't optional, Todoroki. You never learned to share, but it's a good skill, you know. 6-year-olds manage it just fine. At 6 years old, Todoroki starts, dry and deadpan, I was learning more about hand-to-hand combat, so I don't think I know what you mean. Please, Uraraka-san, drop it. While her lips press into a tight, thin line, Uraraka doesn't say anything more on the matter. The matter isn't dropped entirely, of course, because rumor spreads fast in dorms in which no one can leave. Izuku is just surprised, to say the least, when he hears a knock on his door at approximately 8:09 at night and opens it to see Ijiro Kirishima standing there, his hands knotted together and gaze downturned, as though looking Izuku in the eyes is going to burn him. There's something incredibly strange in seeing someone as big and strong as Kirishima try to hunch in on himself to make himself appear smaller, something strange in seeing the best of them fall into the lifestyle they did. Izuku mourns it, sometimes, the life that could have been. When he was little, he wanted to be a hero. Until he was 14, he wanted to be a hero. When All Might told him on that rooftop that he couldn't be a hero, he didn't give up on it then. It ended in a quirk that he couldn't use and a burning in his lungs that lasted through the night, a suffocation he shared with Katsuki, though Katsuki was under longer than him and would never admit it. After that? Well, why would Izuku want to be a hero when he's seen the frauds that take up the center stage, steal the spotlight and make sure it stays on them with a vice grip while the shadows tear at, eat away at those underneath them? Either way, the matter at hand is that Kirishima is standing in his doorway and Izuku has just stared at him for the last 15 seconds, in which he awkwardly moves to the side to apologize non-verbally for spacing out. What's up? Do you need something? I wanted to talk about what happened with Dabi and the other villains. Kirishima sounds oh so certain of himself, but there's a shake to his voice, a crack on the syllables that brings pause to his certainty. Kirishima steps into the room, but he keeps to himself and takes care not to touch anything. Really, he's a polite guest. Kirishima could've, should've, been someone destined for far greater than the hell they've made their beds in. But sometimes the dice don't roll that way. Izuku hums, the only response he knows to give when he's stalling for words. While most tell him it's something sinister, or that it's creepy to start humming a love song or a lullaby, it's calming to him. What about it? You ended up with Kaken, didn't you? Yeah, I did actually, Kirishima says, only sitting on the bed when Izuku gestures for him to do so, and even then he still makes sure that the comforter doesn't crease under his weight. Izuku sits next to him, far enough away to keep personal distance. We got into a disagreement, and I don't know how to fix it. I don't know Kaken as well as I used to, but I might be able to help. What were the two of you arguing about? It's true, a fact Izuku treasures as much as he despises. He doesn't know Katsuki like he used to. At least, in middle school, when Katsuki shoved him around and told him to swan dive off a roof, Izuku knew exactly why he did it and exactly why Katsuki didn't actually hate him. They've always had a strange relationship, but Izuku's understood Katsuki where Katsuki hasn't understood him. That's how it used to work. Nowadays, Izuku doesn't chase after him, per se, but Katsuki's emotions are spiraling and climbing at random intervals that Izuku can't predict. It makes Katsuki both more valuable and more of a wild card. Izuku has the feeling it has something to do with when Katsuki's been in contact with Kirishima and when he hasn't. Kirishima sighs, staring down at his hands. The boy's nails are all screwed up, the cuticles too long and the nails themselves are filthy. There's a strange point to them just as there's a strange point to Kirishima's teeth, and his calluses are evident at just a glance. Took an undercover mission a while ago. It was nothing too bad, just some bodyguarding, smuggling for some shiploaders. Arms dealers, I think. But I left without saying goodbye and I know I should have stayed, but it put me closer to home and Kirishima clearly wants to add more and doesn't know whether he should or not. Izuku tries to give what is, hopefully, an encouraging smile. Those have never been his forte, but he's trying, all right? What else? It put me closer to home and I just wonder if he's mad because I got to pretend I went home and he can't do that. It's like it takes everything in Kirishima to say just that, to spit the words out like poison in his throat, his lungs. Like Izuku's response is either the antidote or the finishing blow, which means he has to watch his words. I think Izuku starts slowly, careful to pick the direction he goes in. I think he doesn't want to go home either way. Auntie Mitsuki, Kaken's mom, wasn't the best mom in the whole world. They weren't close. Kaken just missed you. Why would he miss me? Finally, something Izuku can't answer no matter how hard he tries. Because he doesn't know. Katsuki Bakugu is many things, and unpredictable has become one of them. Izuku doesn't know how to categorize Katsuki so long as Kirishima is by his side. I don't know, Izuku says honestly. Isn't that something you should ask him? I think we both know he wouldn't answer me. After that, silence reigns. The one thing they have in common is one that confuses the both of them, but Kirishima doesn't rush to leave and so Izuku doesn't make him. If there's something else on his mind, Izuku would rather know now than find out later. And Kirishima adds awkwardly, no doubt trying to either end the conversation on a good note or trying to steer the conversation away entirely. I guess I want your opinion on something. No need to be hesitant with me, Kirishima, Izuku hums, gesturing him into his room. It's barer than anything, but it's not like he's been able to decorate it. All his belongings are either in his home base or at his home, which he hasn't returned to in years. I don't bite or anything. I'm pretty sure I saw you bite Ida once. That was Ida, not you. I will bite Ida at any given moment. That's fair, I think. Kirishima still hesitates in his doorway, but eventually gets over whatever notions were clouding his head and steps in. Izuku goes and sits in his desk chair, so naturally, Kirishima sits on his desk. When that attack happened, it was a small-scale attack of all things. Izuku knows that there will be fallout, but Jesus, it's not like it was that bad or anything. Even if Izuku would much prefer Todoroki family drama stay behind closed doors. What of it? Kirishima shrugs again. He's bad about second-guessing himself. No wonder he chose his friends the way he did, when they're all impulsive and passionate and never think things through. It's his perfect other half. It felt nice to fight again. But it felt wrong to do it here. At UA aren't we supposed to be reforming again? It was either fight or be killed. They wouldn't have killed us, right? It was Dabi, wasn't it? With a lot of other small-time villains. Izuku can't make eye contact, can't. He knows far too much about a villain like that, from Todoroki's nightmares and to the reason Toga knows so much about a couple of specific topics. They would have killed all of us, or kept us hostage to use as leverage against Toga and Todoroki if we hadn't fought. So, fighting was really our only option. For some reason or another, Kirishima sighs, resting his elbows on his knees and his head in his hands. Izuku doesn't quite know what he was doing during the attack other than that he'd been with Kaken. There was too much going on for Izuku to try keeping track of everyone. Yeah, it was, Izuku says, wanting to reach out and not knowing how. He used to be good at comfort, if only because of how much his mom had to cheer him up in middle school. It's been a long time, okay? Do you not like fighting? It's not that, Kirishima says, a pause in his voice. Trying to figure out the right words. It isn't that, I've been fighting my whole life, I can do that. I just think that if we're here to reform or something, we shouldn't have to fight. Would you miss it though? And God, does Izuku want to know what'll happen when they graduate? Not only are they going to graduate well into their 20s unlike everyone else, They're also not legally, condoned is a good way to put it. Are they going to need to go into witness protection? Is Aizawa going to get them new identities? Are they going to make it that long? What happens if Aizawa doesn't think they're ready to graduate at the end of their time here? If they don't want to reform? Look, Izuku can admit that he hasn't had the best time with the whole being missing thing. Eating practical trash and never having access to laundry, never knowing if he's going to freeze to death in his sleep, it isn't the best. But that doesn't mean he wants to give it up for a regular 9. He'd been miserable in the way he lived and enamored with the way he worked. He can make an impact. He knows he can. He'd been stuck between a rock and a hard place when he'd made his deal. Take the worst Aizawa had to offer, or go to prison. They were old enough that they'd all be tried as adults. Izuku didn't mind himself getting arrested. Lord knew he had enough connections to get out of it, but Todoroki and Bakugo. It would have been a mess that he couldn't fix. Whether it's a good impact or not is up for debate. That's why Ishido and Shinso are the way they are. It's selfish to take credit for someone's lived experience. But they wouldn't be so cruel if Izuku hadn't failed them. Midoriya? Man, you there? Izuku blinks. And suddenly he's brought back to the fact that he's sitting in his desk chair, staring at Kirishima. Hopefully, he hasn't been zoned out for too long. Yeah, sorry, habit. Izuku forces a shrug. I guess it depends on what you want to do when you leave. Depends on what Aizawa wants too, I think. And do you think he wants us fighting? You can ask him. It's just because Izuku doesn't know the answer. He doesn't know the answer much anymore. I mean, we have to go to homeroom early tomorrow morning. Now it's Kirishima's turn to blink. We do. Since when? Iman, we get attacked and we're still going to school at o'clock in the morning? Izuku snorts, pointing at the sticky note stuck to the bulletin board that he'd found outside of his door last night and along everyone else's doors. I think you're picking up some vocabulary from Kaken. Anyway, half an hour early. Kirishima groans, but this time it doesn't have the same weight to it. Great. Thanks for talking to me. It was nice to get it off my chest. Izuku doesn't miss the tension between Todoroki and Uraraka the next morning. He's standing by the coffee maker watching the liquid drip down the sides of the pot, whereas Todoroki's by the toaster, seemingly transfixed by how the machine works, and Uraraka's at the breakfast nook eating a bagel that Izuku didn't think they had. Between them, the air is electric, and not in a good way, in the way that everyone, even Kaminari, is avoiding them to the best of their abilities. And Izuku is stuck by the coffee maker, with no way of leaving unless it's getting between them. The barrier isn't a visible one, but it feels like something will snap if he crosses it. Uraraka wants to know why her friends got hurt. It's a noble cause. It's just that Todoroki's never been so noble in his life and isn't going to start. Honesty isn't always the best policy. Honesty is never the best policy if you ask Todoroki. Little white lies make up his person until it's the only thing he knows. Izuku had to strip those white lies down layer by layer, and he's still nowhere close to the person underneath if there's anything down there that hasn't been damaged by the life Todoroki's led. When Uraraka speaks, it's with a little bow of her head that has her bangs falling into her face and an apple in her hand, her eyes on Todoroki. I'm sorry for pushing, yesterday, Todoroki-kun. Izuku stops momentarily, raising a brow. Todoroki does the same, though he simply crosses his arms. His bangs are always in his face. Izuku wishes he'd cut them, at least once. Oh, do not accept your apology, Uraraka-san. It's not as though she was expecting anything else, given the way she tilts her head up and tosses the apple to her other hand. I know. I'm still going to push, you know. I certainly do. And you're still not going to answer because you're incapable of doing so. I'm perfectly capable of disclosing what I'd like to disclose. Todoroki's face is still the passive, blank expression that scares Izuku at times. There's no reason someone should look so calm in the face of fear, or in the face of anger, or greatness, or anything. Although the expression is something he's started to mimic. No, you're capable of lying whenever someone gets too close to the truth, she says stiffly. It's one of your worst traits. You don't belong here if you can't even try to let anyone in. Or if you're going to put us all in danger. Todoroki's jaw clicks. It's the most emotion he's shown all morning. On the contrary, I'd believe it's me putting you all in less danger. It wasn't my choice to be here. Nor was it mine. Eraser offered you a choice to be here. It's not as though you were in a jail cell when Midoriya made his god-awful deal dash. It wasn't really a choice, Todoroki. It was either agree or get hunted down. Have you ever dash? I don't care, Uraraka. It wasn't my own volition to be here and therefore it isn't my job to share anything with you. Even if it gets people killed? For the first time, Todoroki shouts. His voice reverberates off the cabinets, off the counters. The universe itself knows this isn't what's supposed to happen. And Izuku is transfixed as he stares, unable to do anything else. When have I ever cared about people getting killed? Todoroki shouts, taking a deep breath and shaking his bangs out of his face. Death is a fact of life. I don't care if it happens early. I don't care about Midoriya and his DMN miracle list, and I don't give a DMN if you all end up dead. It happens in an instant. One moment the kitchen is dead silent as everyone stares at Todoroki, as does Uraraka, and the next. Well, her left hook has always packed a punch. From there it's a flurry that Izuku doesn't have the time to analyze, but Todoroki's so stunned from the punch that Uraraka easily pushes him to the ground, and from there they're both grappling for purchase and for blows and for what hurts. Shinso glances at the pair wrestling on the floor. Is that blood? And crosses his arms before looking to Izuku. The coffee's done brewing. Hand it over or drink it. Izuku chooses to hand it over in a daze. For the first time in his life, he doesn't know what to do, not with Todoroki's words ringing in his head. Does he really not care, or is he lying again? How would Izuku know? And why does it suddenly make his heart constrict thinking about blood on his hands, on Todoroki's, on anyone's? He's never had to worry about that before. Bad people have bad things happen to them. Most of the time, it's Izuku enacting those bad things. It's never bothered him before. Never. Shinso makes a soft sound of acknowledgement, perhaps the softest thing he's capable of doing. We're going to be late to class if they keep that up. Remember, homeroom's a half-hour early. Despite the fight, Todoroki and Uraraka manage to make it to homeroom only a couple of minutes late, though a bruise is blossoming across. Todoroki's jaw and cheekbone, purple in color. Both of their hair looks horrible, and Uraraka's knuckles are bloodied, her arms littered with already forming bruises as well. It does seem like it's nothing more than surface injuries, which is good. The quirk repressors are to blame for that. It would have turned into far worse than simply a kitchen fight if it had. What is it with their dorm kitchen and fistfights breaking out? Izuku swears he's heard this record before. Still, their uniforms are rucked up and Aizawa glares as they enter the classroom. No one said a word since their imaginary bell rang, not until the two absent students make their way in. Todoroki stands away from everyone, whereas Uraraka comes to stand right next to Izuku. Izuku wants to focus. He wants to focus. But all he can think is I don't care about Midoriya and his DMN miracle list, and I don't give a DMN if you all end up dead. It isn't the words themselves. It's the sincerity behind them. Todoroki's been raised around killers. It's the world he knows. And Izuku knows what it's like. He doesn't mind blood being spilled. It's a choice he has to make, though, to turn his gaze the other way. Aizawa clears his throat, effectively clearing the air as best he can. Students. No one responds to his greeting, so Aizawa continues, his voice dry and scratchy as he scans each of them over. It's obvious that he notices the way Uraraka looks and the way Todoroki's pulled away, but he chooses not to comment on it. I know it's early. I hate being up as much of you. There is news for you, however. Is it for the attack? Ashido spits, quite literally, with her arms crossed. She knows how to glare even better than Bakugo. She hasn't threatened to kill anyone yet. Izuku catches the way Toga catches her by the arm and pulls her back, almost pulls her close. Perhaps this environment's been helping Ashido more than she let on. Somewhat. How the hell can it be somewhat? Aizawa must notice the rise in both defensiveness and curiosity, their default need to know. The news comes from your reactions upon your attack. By definition, you're all villains. With the way Aizawa says the word, it's just a word. It's not meant with malice, it isn't romanticized, it's just a word. It isn't anything to define them by. However, he continues, I know that isn't true. It's by technicality alone. Breaking or twisting the law doesn't make you a villain. Murder does. Izuku hums, slipping on a smirk that he used to be oh so accustomed to, but it feels foreign on his face and he doesn't know how to feel about that. Yue can't make him soft. He isn't soft by nature, he's been cut into the diamond he is, and that isn't a reversible process. Murder makes a villain. Does it? Silence reigns. It usually does when Aizawa starts his speeches like this, if only because the man doesn't make a habit of them. And so, again, Aizawa takes the lone stage. By technicality, I should have handed you all over to the authorities. This program didn't exist until Midoriya, Todoroki, and Bakugo were taken into custody and I made a choice. In theory, I've known that you are all capable of handling yourselves. However, it's only with the recent attack that I've seen that in action. It's impressive, the way you carry yourselves. That's the biggest compliment Izuku's ever gotten from Aizawa. What are you implying, Eraser? It's Katsuki, his voice as raspy and forced out as ever. Izuku sometimes wonders whether he chooses to make himself sound like that or if it's fallout from injuries at Kamino Ward. It's not a question he'll ever truly ask, but it's a wonder. Maybe he'll write it down. He's trying to get back into the habit of taking notes, anyway. I'm implying that you have the raw power and determination to become great heroes. Now that causes a reaction. At first, there's silence, and Izuku simply blinks at Aizawa because he doesn't know what else to do, and the next, there's an outcry and not just from him. Eraser, you can't possibly dash. What have we ever dash? We aren't dash. Stupid enough to dash. It's incoherently stupid to dash. Aizawa glares. While their quirk repressors cause his quirk to become essentially useless, the glowing red eyes and floating hair certainly do the trick enough as he brings his hand up and demands silence. It works. I've thought about this for a while now, he says patiently, as though he doesn't have a line of demanding effing villains wanting to know why he'd ever think that was a good idea. And I've thought about the fact that being at UA has already robbed you of your previous occupations. What the hell is that supposed to mean? Todoroki says calmly, his arms crossed over his chest. It means that it's going to be difficult to assimilate you into normal civilian lives given what you've done previously. With the majority of you being legally dead, missing, or wanted, there's little option in terms of bringing you back to life without question. Izuku notices the way Kirishima deflates at that. He still has a home to go back to, the only thing stopping him is his own self-confidence, the need to be good enough to go back. Izuku would know. Every time he thinks of his mother, he thinks of his own hands stained in red and he can't bear it anymore. That being said, Aizawa continues, witness protection is always an option. But who wants to work a 9 to 5 when you've seen the world for what it is? Why would we want to be heroes in a broken system? Todoroki says bluntly, his words carrying that familiar razor-blade edge that he'd used when he was speaking to Uraraka. He's grown up in the in-between, the world between civilians and heroes, and it was nothing other than blood, Izuku thinks. He was convinced life was little more than a war front before he was 7 years old. It's tragic, but it isn't the worst thing Izuku's ever heard. Another fact of life is just that, a fact of life. At this point, Aizawa starts to grin, the unsettling, unnerving thing that reminds Izuku of how similar they really are. That's the best part, Todoroki. Did you know that underground heroes don't answer to the Hero Commission? Izuku did. Izuku knows. They're little more than vigilantes on a payroll. Aizawa doesn't want to turn them into the media puppets that he's grown up with. The words are leaving Izuku's mouth before he has the chance to fully process them. You don't really mind the things we've done, do you, Eraser? The man himself doesn't turn his gaze to Izuku, still staring resolutely at Todoroki, who isn't backing down. That's never been his style, anyway. You've broken the law so many times it's hard to distinguish what we should even charge you for should you flunk out of the program. The only difference between you and I, Izuku says, trying his damnedest to keep the awe from slipping into his voice. He'd known, in some aspect he'd always known, but now, is that when you do it, there's a blind eye turned. You said it, not me, kid. Katsuki bares his teeth, as he always does during these sorts of things. We aren't going to be little fucking puppets for you, you know. It worked out so well last time. Right? Sometimes Izuku forgets that Eraserhead was Katsuki's homeroom teacher, before his supposed death declaration at Kamino when All Might was forcibly retired. Green lightning tries to spark at the memory of that night, but the bracelet prevents it and Izuku doesn't mind. The vestiges are annoying anyway, he isn't the user. They want it and he knows that. He's the only one alive when it matters, though. Aizawa grimaces. It won't be like that again. Your class won't be in the spotlight, doesn't exist legally, and the only outward attention you'll get is from the other faculty and me. When you have to take your licensing exam, it's held in another city, and it's severely unlikely you'll run into anyone you know. That's too much at once. Too much, too much, too much. Aizawa isn't trying to change them, not really. Aizawa isn't trying to strip them down to their bare bones and make good complacent citizens out of the kids that were left rotting in back alleys until the run came up and they were able to crawl away from the vultures. Aizawa isn't trying to make an army out of them, Aizawa's only trying to legalize their work. However, Aizawa adds on, perhaps knowing the thought process running through those in front of him. As underground heroes, there are some principles you'll be tasked to uphold whether you believe in them or not. I'll address these issues with each individual as such. But from now on, your curriculum will involve hero and quirk training. Understand? And if we don't want to become part of this? Momo asks, raising her hand to the air with the elegant, flat stare that's intimidated so many people before. It reminds Izuku of the tattoos that live along her hips, that he's only seen a couple of times. A weird side effect of her quirk is that when she pushes something out with it, it moves around the ink on her skin. Momo Yaoyorozu has become a MSTR at manipulating her tattoos. Quite the artist, really. Then your curriculum will be the same. It's optional. Maybe that's the part that confuses Izuku the most. He's never been given options, not really. Todoroki, Izuku says, walking over to the boy in question, who's sitting alone at lunch for the first time in a while. They're still in their dorm for lunch, but still. Are you all right? I'm getting rather tired of hearing my name, Todoroki says bluntly and makes no invitation to invite Izuku to sit. But that's all right, because Izuku makes one, sitting on the stool opposite him. That just means you have friends, doesn't it? No. It doesn't. He points with that same monotone expression on his face, toward the bruise on his face. It's worse now that it's had time to fully form, across his jaw and crawling up his cheekbone. On the unscarred side of his face, too. That I suppose. I don't blame her, though, Todoroki. You have to understand that. In a way, I do. In every other, I hold true that it's stupid to dig into someone's personal life when holding secrets of your own. That isn't what Izuku wants to talk about, not really. He knows his expression grows serious, setting his utensils on the side of his bowl and trying to gauge Todoroki's mood. It's DMing near impossible, but it'll have to do. You know you didn't have to accept my offer, right? The deal? You didn't have to come to you, didn't I? Would it kill Todoroki to show any emotion at all? No, you didn't, Izuku continues, swallowing. You could have rejected the offer. It was prison or a glorified high school sitcom, Todoroki huffed, pushing away his bowl of noodles entirely. There's no one that would have broken me out, and so we're here. Izuku frowns. Wouldn't your brother have broken you out? You know, Dobby seemed rather dash. Shut up about my brother. All right. Sore subject. Izuku should have known, but then again, that's one family dynamic he's never been able to understand. Replacements and infernos, ice walls and burning gazes. It's all an entirely different world from the fake calm that Izuku's used to. Reminds him of the first time he ever saw Katsuki after middle school. The shore had been a shock for the both of them. Todoroki looks unsure, hesitant, glancing down at his food like it's going to bite him or something, those his fingers drift up to graze along the edges of his bruise. A memento of a disagreement. It's not as though I mind being here. It's been a long time since there's this safety. Todoroki didn't have to say it for Izuku to understand. And because of that, Izuku only hums, a sympathetic shrug of his shoulders to convey that he knows exactly what Todoroki means. If he interrupts him now, Todoroki won't ever open up again. I am not a hero, he says, with the same conviction in his eyes as he used to have when Izuku met him. Lost and determined, lost and passionate, fighting for something he doesn't know the name of. I was made to be one and therefore I am the antithesis of a hero. Still, villain doesn't suit me, reckless destruction leaves no one the wiser. It leads to permanent sorrow, and sorrow is not my saint. The antithesis of a hero is a villain, Izuku points out, hesitant in his words. Is it? If you're using the Hero Commission's definition, then yes, Todoroki says, a sardonic smile slipping onto his face. A hero is a citizen who goes above and beyond to help those in need, with the necessary licensing. But you know better, don't you, Midoriya? Izuku stays quiet. The problem is that Todoroki's right, is that hero doesn't mean what it used to, doesn't mean the same thing to him as it did when he was a kid. When he watched All Might on the evening news and thought there was nothing more impressive than the symbol of peace. Now, he knows there's nothing more impressive than the sway a couple of words can give, but green lightning still flickers under his skin, unable to be released as always. I think a hero is what you make it, Todoroki, Izuku says, reaching over the table to push scarred, bent fingers along Todoroki's slender ones, both bracketing the bruises. There's a difference between eraser and endeavor. There's a difference between you and Dabi. There's a line in the sand between good and evil, Todoroki mumbles. If Izuku didn't know any better, he would think Todoroki was leaning into his hand, into the contact. Does Izuku know better? And sometimes that line gets blurred, Izuku refutes. That's why we're here. Not because I had to really make the decision, but because it was offered. Eraser knew you weren't who you were raised to be. Izuku, I don't. Izuku's never heard Todoroki say his given name before. It makes him feel warm where their hands touch. He doesn't know what this is, but it's something he doesn't want to break. Shame it took a couple of fistfights for Todoroki to figure out what it was he wanted. You're not alone, anymore, I'm not Dabi, Izuku says, soft as he can manage. It isn't a hang you out to dry and see what happens situation. I swear to God you'll never be alone again, you hear me? I swear it. Todoroki doesn't make eye contact, glancing at the table rather than at Izuku, but his voice comes out soft and brittle, trusting and soft and the most vulnerable tone Izuku has ever heard him speak in. You swear it. And that is that. Izuku's made a promise, now, and it's one he intends to keep. What do you think, Ashido? Denki says, his feet on the desk and his fingers nearly grazing the tile floor of the mostly empty classroom. While most try to spread out as much as they can during lunch, there are a couple that like to group together and eat in the classroom. That group is specifically Denki, Ashido, Shinso, and Toga. Ashido isn't necessarily a people person, and shows this by trying to isolate herself even in group settings, but that's more than difficult with Denki and Toga around, he knows. Ashido and Shinso just need to find their kind of people and then they'll come out of their shells. She stabs at her bowl with a spoon. Denki didn't know spoons could harbor that much aggression, but then again, I think it's bullshit. Just because we're here doesn't mean we want to be. I mean, isn't it? Denki asked, shrugging, and shoveling a mouthful of noodles onto his tongue before he said anything stupid that got him smacked. Wouldn't be the first time nor the last. He swallows without really chewing, coughing a couple of times as penance. In my case, at least, I want to be here. I want to see what Midoriya thought was so great about it. Midoriya didn't. Shinso says simply, that same blank expression on his face as always. Kinda freaks Denki out, he wants to see the guy smile every once in a while, see if he was physically capable of it anymore. Think it was great, that is. Or so I hear. An information broker through and through. Toga giggles with her face held in her hands with her elbows on the table, excitedly leaning in for more, and Denki would be lying if he said he wasn't mimicking her. Shinso rolls his eyes but doesn't correct her. There's nothing to correct. Midoriya was between a rock and a hard place when he made his deal with Eraser. There was no being clever about it. Exactly, Ashido huffs. We're just FNG pity cases. Like hell I want to be Midoriya's pity case. Hasn't he caused enough trouble? What do you mean? Denki can't help but ask, tilting his head in confusion, especially when Shinso nods his head in agreement. He doesn't think Midoriya's half bad. If he's being honest with himself, the guy fascinates him. What kind of person is able to have all these stories under his belt? Is able to do so much in so little time? What kind of person holds the same power as Midoriya Izuku? It isn't just leverage, and that's what makes Midoriya special. Most people like that, what they need and what they crave is leverage, the tipping point that can make anyone do anything. Not Midoriya. No, his poison is a much more sinister kind, the kind that makes you want to care. He's the type of person you can trust within minutes of meeting, even when you don't try to. You can know him for an hour, and if he asked you to jump out a plane with him, you'd readily agree. Perhaps that's why everyone on his little list made it here. Because Midoriya said jump, and they said how high. It's a disaster waiting to happen. See, the Dabi incident, and whatever the hell happened between Uraraka and Todoroki. But Denki wants to see how it turns out, if he's on the right side at the end of the war. That's the game hackers like him always play. This might as well be another job, right? Shinso makes a non-committal sound of acknowledgement, shaking his head before picking up his drink and downing it like a shot. Denki hears that Shinso used to hold his liquor quite well, perhaps he's missing it. Midoriya. He's already got us all here and he's already got a pro-hero trying to preach for us. Doesn't he know what this is going to do? I don't think I'm getting it. And Denki absolutely isn't. What does that have to do with anything? There are a lot of consequences to Midoriya's actions, and their own, and what this'll do doesn't narrow it down in the slightest. Shinso could be talking about the plants needing to be watered or World War III for all Denki knows. Even still, Toga's the one who seems to catch where he's going with it and continues on happily, though her fang catches on her lip again and it starts bleeding. She doesn't seem to notice. What'll happen when we're gone? If we're all here, then who replaced us? Why do we need replacing? Ashido snarls, but there's something softer to it, her grip loosening on her spoon. We Donnie need replacing, not really. But everyone thinks we do, so someone will be moved into the role. Who becomes the villain after me? The assassin after Himiko? The information broker after Shinso? And what happens when Midoriya is replaced? It'll either be by some poor sap who'll get himself killed in 3 minutes, Shinso says, or someone worse than Midoriya with a heart that doesn't have the same compass. Toga laughs. Not like Aizu-chan would ever let that happen, of course. Shinso grimaces. Yeah, I know Midoriya wouldn't. Trust me. Trust you, or do we trust Midoriya? It's off topic, sort of, but it's the only thing on Denki's mind. Midoriya wanted them all here, for a reason. He didn't have to add them to his list. Midoriya wants them here and Midoriya's got Denki wrapped around his finger, too. Denki knows that. Midoriya trusted Aizawa enough to allow Aizawa to come up with this absurd idea, them being heroes. I'm willing to trust him, Denki shrugs. If we can be heroes, underground heroes, why the hell not? What's there to lose? Hell, for the next 3 years we get guaranteed food, shelter, and clothing, so I don't see any reason to object. The quirks thing is kind of stupid, though. Why would you ever trust Izuku Midoriya? Ashido's almost patronizing. It's annoying. And Denki knows his speeches are working because it's patronizing and not the same acidic that would have had him dead on the floor in a pile of acid, had this been a few short months ago. Because, Denki says, I already trusted him once, right? By agreeing to go here? What's a couple more times? He gets no response from the group. The air feels lighter, though, and for once, Ashido doesn't snap at anyone. In fact, she bumps shoulders against Denki and Denki hasn't felt this elated since Shinso remembered his name. If we're going to be heroes, Izuku says slowly, looking at the circle made around the common room. It isn't something they had to do, but it's the middle of the night, they're in their pajamas, and Izuku's never felt more excited to be at school than he does right now, looking each of his new, classmates in the eyes. They're going to be heroes. The underground heroes that don't have to worry about the press and don't have to worry about the Hero Commission and the corruption it leaks out, blood from the corpse of the ideals Hero Society once held. Then we need to have allies, Izuku finishes finally, watching each reaction with glee. Everyone is sitting in a circle with varying degrees of alertness. Him, Katsuki, Uraraka, Todoroki, Shinso, Yaoyorozu, Kirishima, Toga, Kaminari, Ashido, Shiro, and Ida. Too many people for him to have kept track of this whole time, but he's glad that they've decided to venture out of their dorms for this. Katsuki's just annoyed at having been woken up in the middle of the night, but his irritation is mostly dulled by Kirishima, by his side, despite the fact that Kirishima still seems somewhat troubled and lost. Uraraka and Toga are sitting remarkably close together in matching pajamas, with the gleam of mischief in their eyes that mean they want to know what he's planning now. Shinsu's sitting alone, legs crossed and face blank, as it always is whenever Izuku is in the room. The two he's keeping an eye on are Todoroki and Ashido. Todoroki doesn't want to be a hero, that's true. Todoroki doesn't want to be what he was meant to be in the first place. How is it rebellion if he's still doing exactly what his father wants? Something like that? He seems more comfortable with himself, though, and the bruise on his face is worn with honor rather than scorn. Maybe he and Uraraka talked or something. And Ashido, for just a second, glances at the little group they've made here, and he can almost pretend. He sees the girl he used to know. Then she's back to the scorned glances and crossed arms, but it's something. What do you mean? Uraraka says hesitantly, the silence weighing down like fog on a winter night. The little light let in by the windows brings the volume down by default. It's the middle of the night. And while most of them have made their dwellings in the dark, in the horrors it has to offer, now that they've had a taste of the sunlight it feels wrong, out of place. Izuku certainly doesn't feel the same certainty as he used to, in green pajamas rather than the ill-managed suit he's gotten used to. We'll need allies, Izuku echoes again, shrugging. We're going to be rejected by every single hero that's already licensed. The only support we'll get and can count on is from Aizawa. From the day we agree to this, we'll be targeted by villains and by heroes. Then we're in low supply of allies, Ida says quietly, and sheet, Izuku jumps. He'd forgotten Ida was there entirely. It's a habit of Ida's, and one that he's clearly gotten too comfortable with if he's getting startled. No one points out Izuku's ship, though. This isn't the same game of weaknesses as it used to be. We are. And there's no guarantee our jobs will be to senselessly hunt down villains. We can help. We'll be heroes. There won't be any dirty cash involved. Denki grins. Don't be so sure about that. There won't be any unsanctioned dirty cash, Izuku corrects, sitting crisscross and resting his head in his hands, his elbow digging into his knee. But as I said, we're low on allies and we're low on selling points. We don't really have anything going for us, do we? Keep talking, nerd, Katsuki grunts, but his voice lacks the usual bite, perhaps from how his head is rested against Kirishima's shoulder. Kirishima seems alright with it for now. He's treating Katsuki like one would treat a stray cat that's decided to take up residence with them for the day. Anything else you want to complain about? Izuku shrugs as best as he can with the way he's sitting. Not at all, Kaken. I was just thinking that we could extend our invitation to some, other individuals. You want to invite more people to the class? Yaoyorozu sounds questioning, but her voice is firm. He used to know her when she was meeker and indecisive, and Izuku will never stop wondering what happened in the 3 years they didn't speak that led to this. Probably too much to cover in one conversation. Oh, they've all changed so much since when Izuku first met them. Even since just being at UA, they've changed more than they'll admit. Do you think Aizawa will be willing to go and find more FING people? Katsuki says, again, lacking bite. Shiro shrugs. I dunno, man. The class is already big enough, isn't it? There's, 12 of us? Isn't that enough? And why couldn't we have this conversation at, like, a normal human time? That's where Izuku grins, intentionally mimicking the sleepy, dopey look on his face from everyone else. That's what I'm suggesting. I don't think Aizawa wants to extend the invitation, but I think we can. If you all have any suggestions, I'm sure we can find them. That grants him a lot of reactions all at once. Whoa, Midoriya, are you suggesting we dash? Why do you think we can dash? Escape your dash. There's so much secure dash. You don't know when dash. But the only reaction Izuku pays any attention to is from Yaoyorozu, who calmly asks, "Who do you suggest we bring on?" "You're the original. It's only fair if you get first pick." Izuku beams. "I do have some suggestions. But what about you?" "Fire off some names, and if we can find them, we find them, and we offer to let them join." "All right." Before Izuku can recognize what he started, the names start pouring in, and most of them he recognizes. People he's met here and there, perhaps none that he'd write down himself simply because he has a gap in his knowledge relating to them. Kyuka Jairu, Tsuyu Azui, Mezu Shuji, Tokoyami. Ajuru would be a nice addition. I think Kudo would be a good fit. Daya think Aoyama would think this sheet twinkles enough to accept? They spend less than 30 minutes on the topic, but eventually, it's narrowed down to those 7 names: Jairu, Azui, Shuji, Tokoyami, Ajuru, Kuda, and Aoyama. Izuku doesn't know Shuji well at all. He's heard of the man in passing, but they've never met face to face. Perhaps that's a good thing, given that Shuji's specialty is reconnaissance missions, something Izuku usually does on his own. Tokoyami Fumikage is a powerhouse of his own right, with the calm, collected control of Todoroki with the explosive temper of Katsuki's that resides in Dark Shadow. Masahiro Ajuru is a martial arts expert with a history of doing odd, dangerous jobs every once in a while for the cash, but he always seeks them out, they never come to him. He's a good person, just in a bad place. He'd be perfect. Kyuka Jairu is a mystery to him. Kyuka Jairu is a recommendation from Yaoyorozu, in the tone that insists that Yaoyorozu already made up her mind. Apparently, the girl works with Yaoyorozu, working mostly in organized crime due to her quirk being specialized for stealth and information, and Shinso's apparently heard of her. Then again, Shinsu's heard of everyone. He's able to fill in every and all gaps that Izuku has. Information pays, isn't that how the saying goes? An information broker through and through, hopefully the skill will serve him well. Once they have their targets established, Izuku stands, bowing dramatically as though his audience isn't a group of 18-19-year-olds in embarrassing pajamas, and brushes his hair out of his face when he stands back up again. "Now then, shall we escape?" It's easier said than done. Izuku knew that when he thought of the idea. Still, it frustrates him. They need to be off the campus before sunrise because sunrise was when it became more difficult to hide. Just because he felt out of place in the dark now didn't mean it wasn't where he belonged. He's lived in the shadows far too long to truly leave them now. He is becoming an underground hero after all. See, the trick to escaping is simple, knowing how to get over the barrier, and from there, how to get the quirk repressing bracelets off. The bracelets make it easy to cross the barrier. The barrier isn't designed like normal security measures. It's designed to protect against attacks. It doesn't register body scans and thermals because there are people out there whose physiology makes it obsolete. The barrier registers quirks. Everyone's quirk is put into a database the moment it's registered, their names and their quirks and what makes their quirk unique, because no 2 quirks are the same, in much the same way snowflakes are. If you're quirkless, it's still registered, simply as unknown. Unknown isn't as high of a threat as a registered quirk, simply because it so rarely happens now with only 20% of the population being quirkless. With the bracelets suppressing their quirks, it effectively masks their identities to the barrier. The unknown quirks and identities will be registered but won't activate the alarm. It's a loophole that no one thought through. The problem, however, is that the barrier is 30 feet tall and has smooth concrete. And they can't access their quirks to get around what would otherwise be a non-issue they could clear in minutes. "We could always jump from the roof of the building to the barrier wall?" Kaminari shrugs, but it's clear to everyone that it's just a half-butted idea that he knows won't go anywhere. And it shouldn't, because the building is 65 feet tall and the barrier is 30 and the margin of error is so high that it shouldn't even be considered, and the landing would be brutal even if they didn't break their legs. "Actually," Izuku mumbles, "I don't hate that idea." Kaminari raises a brow. His expression is such a perfect impression of Todoroki's usual deadpan that it causes Izuku to cackle, no doubt making him sound even more insane than he usually does when he discusses things like this. "That's a good way to die, Midoriya." "Dude, I was joking. It's not the worst idea you've ever had." So long as we're able to soften the landing and make sure everyone knows how to jump, it can't be that bad, right? Kirishima offers a cheerful, "You could break your neck if you miscalculate, but yeah, I don't think it's the worst idea." Even Katsuki offers his 2 cents, not that it's ever mattered before. "Yeah, she could be worse. I'll do it so long as Deku goes first." And that's that. They'll jump it. They just have to figure out how to create a low margin of error and how to get to the roof when the access door is no doubt locked, specifically to keep them out. The solution, as the sun starts to rise, is to leave Kaminari to pick the lock on the access door, hope to God he doesn't set off any alarms, and make Izuku take the first jump onto the barrier wall. It doesn't turn out as badly as any of them feared. If anything, his ankle aches a little and his back is sore from tucking and rolling. Ignoring the fact that he was less than a meter away from falling another 30 feet onto the ground and no doubt breaking his spine. Oh well, wouldn't be the worst thing he's ever done. Still, the issue remains that they need to get everyone else down, and the best solution that the revered class of villains that have made their mark on the underworld in blood and bones is pillows. A stack of pillows that may or may not work, all brought up from each of their respective rooms. Yeah, maybe they spent all their effort into figuring out who they wanted to extend their invitation to, or offering helpful suggestions as Kaminari picked the lock to the roof door. Jairu raises a brow, taking in the twigs in Izuku's hair and the dirt tarnishing Yaoyorozu's silk pajama breathes. "I see you were in a rush." Yaoyorozu simply hums, taking the thinly veiled insult in stride as she steps forward toward Jairu, with no fear in her eyes despite the knife strapped to the girl's thigh and the scar modeled underneath her eye, that's been filled in with orange-pink eyeshadow to cover it up. The wrinkled skin, however, is far harder to disguise than the color. "I wanted to make a deal with you." "Deals with you are never one-sided, Momo," Jairu says, but yet a smile rests easily on her face. There's history there, but Izuku doesn't know it and won't act as he does. He's still got Shinso by his side despite the fact that most of them split up. Shinso probably knows. Izuku can ask if he feels so inclined later. And he most likely will, if Jairu accepts their offer. "They aren't," she says, arms crossed gently. "I'd like to offer to be by your side again." Jur hums, taking another up and down glance at how dirty the three of them look together. Except for Shinso, because he always looks exhausted and in desperate need of a shower. "I'm assuming it'll be me by your side. And the conditions?" "You'd have to come with me for one," Yaoyorozu shrugs. "And for another, you'd be an underground hero." Why in the hell would I ever accept that? What Izuku doesn't expect, however, is the fact that Yaoyorozu simply mimics his own words from earlier. It's the same thing, isn't it? Except with a license. "Considering the number of times I've seen you save someone against your own interests." Jairu narrows her eyes. What happened that caused this proposal? As Yaoyorozu explains, with Jairu's entire attention on her, Izuku can't help but stand back and watch. He's got nothing much to do, and Shinso isn't much of a conversation maker, not with Izuku, although he doesn't feel the same hostility as he used to. Regardless, when they leave the office, it's with Jairu in tow. And Izuku pretends he doesn't notice the way she and Yaoyorozu are holding hands, mostly hidden between their bodies as though Izuku is going to reprimand them. They're only human. Misplaced love seems to be the only thing that holds sway in this world. Love and hate are the only two emotions that can always manipulate when it comes down to him. Love for a person. Hate for an institution. Love for a concept. Hate for a past. Love for revenge. Hate for love. Love for hate. Denki Kaminari doesn't want to be wandering around in the dark tunnels underneath a warehouse, but here he is. You'd think that being a professional hacker that's had plenty of life experience would imbue him with more confidence, or even with a sense of ease in a situation. It doesn't. He's more used to being shoved into a computer screen in various secure locations with various shady people. No, he's with Ishido and Ida, and they're all dead silent as they wander, looking for a staircase that leads to an even deeper tunnel that supposedly is going to lead to a nest. Denki's pretty sure that nests aren't supposed to actually be a thing even with quirks, but who is he to comment? He's seen weirder shit. Maybe it's the revelry in the dark thing the guy is known for. Tokoyami Fumikage and Shuji Mezu are usually found together, if only because those with mutant quirks tend to be outcast and they're more likely to find kinship with each other rather than the outside world, but it doesn't mean that Denki is prepared to meet either of them. He's heard of them, of course, he's heard of them. Tokoyami's Dark Shadow is usually considered a last resort hire for anyone that's looking for a quick job. He's able to make quick work of any job he's properly compensated for. And Denki doesn't know what Shuji's known for, as he's never even heard of the guy, but he thinks that's probably the point given what he's heard tonight. Ashido and Ida, however, don't make for great company, so eventually, Denki decides that maybe it'll be better if he slinks ahead of them in order to find their targets first. He doesn't want to deal with the awkward tension anymore. It isn't even tension, it's the fact that Ida and Ashido have opposing ideals despite the fact that they were shoved under the same label of villain. Ida will kill because it's the best way to get rid of the stains on society that end up plaguing those around them, the type of monsters that are unable to produce anything other than the filth they leave behind in their footprints. And Ashido doesn't care about that. Ashido cares about the power that comes from the ability to take a life because it's the only way to gain respect. Ashido cares because power is the way to change the system that's hurt them all by giving it no other choice than to obey. There's a reason no one dares to sell drags to kids on the streets in her territory anymore. There's a reason that there aren't any working girls out under the age of 18. Denki doesn't blame her, doesn't find her as a failed mistake of his own like he thinks Midoriya does, from the looks he sees Midoriya giving her from time to time. She's right in her own way, but in that same vein, so is Ida, which is where the problem arises. Denki's more than grateful when he sees the staircase leading down further, to whatever floor has no light at all penetrating the shadows that hang lowly around it. He descends without a second thought and it's hardly difficult to get the feeling of cold slime off his back. It's like the shadows are sentient. It wouldn't be the strangest thing he's seen, but it'd be great if it didn't feel like goo. Tokoyami? Denki calls out, but his voice seems to get swallowed by the darkness. It doesn't feel right. It feels like something's missing, and he belatedly realizes that what's missing is electricity as he steps down from the final stair onto the cold concrete he can feel through his shoes. Electricity is missing. There's none down here, which is odd. He's gotten used to the feeling of electricity constantly crackling under his skin, even when the bracelet is on and he's unable to use it. There aren't any lights. There isn't any heat. There's no electricity in the air. The shadows must have swallowed it all in the same way they're already starting to sap his warmth. No response. Denki calls out again, trying both their names this time. Tokoyami? Shuji? A low hissing sound from somewhere, but Denki refuses to back down or let the chill crawl up his spine like it wants to. Hey, he huffs, pulling the short sleeves of his pajama shirt down. It's cold, all right? If you have guests, it's just polite to greet them. It's not like we're down here to take your life's work or anything. Got it? Another hissing sound, but this time it sounds closer to Denki's ear and he jumps, and comes face to face with a pair of white, blinding eyes. Why are they white? Where's the color coming from when there's no light down here? None at all. The only light that seeps into the floor is from the stairwell, and even that is dim and doesn't provide much further than 5 feet down. That means it's glowing. A voice. This time, it doesn't trip Denki out as much as the eyes did. Who seeks out our companionship? It's far too dark to mistakenly wander upon this den. That must be Tokoyami. Denki's heard that he can be unnecessarily dramatic, but the whole posh vocabulary is more than overkill, in his opinion. Then again, he's been known to forget half of his sentences, and they don't make sense without the other half that he forgot. It's a brutal CC, really. Denki snorts, brushing his bangs out of his face to try and keep his disbelief out of his voice. It probably isn't a good idea to try smart-mouthing a guy known to kill for the low price of whatever the hell he got paid in. Feathers? My name's Kaminari. Midoriya sent me. A couple of my friends will be down here soon. A different voice, this time, low and smooth. And what did Midoriya send you down here for? That must be Shuji then. He sounds like the type of guy you would trust, just from voice alone. That's probably a weird opinion, but Denki's been told all his life that he thinks weird things like that all the time and so he doesn't actually care anymore. He has an invitation for you. Really, it's from all of us. By the time Denki's done explaining the reform program and the idea to become underground heroes under Aizawa's training and how they need more of their own, Ida and Ishido have joined by his side, keeping quiet and not joining in the conversation as they glare at each other over his shoulders. Not that there's any light, still. He can just feel the glare. Tokoyami hums, a strange sound that seems to reverberate off the walls that Denki still can't see. The chill of the shadow, at least, has mostly gone away, although his toes are freezing and his pajamas were a good call. Pajamas. He feels like he's thinking about that a lot. It's sort of fun. It feels like being a kid again, sneaking out in his pajamas instead of being, well, who he is. Like they're turning back the clock even if they're sneaking out for far more sinister things than stealing snacks from the corner store. Will you tentatively accept your invitation? Shuji says. When Izuku makes it back to the dorms, and by that he means the gate to UA, it's 5 in the afternoon the next day and he's now joined by Jairu, Momo, Tsuyu, and Shinso. All the other groups are already there. Kirishima and Katsuki seem to have picked up Ajuru, and Toga seems to have found both Kuda and Aoyama, as they're both standing next to her and apparently having a very heated conversation with a crow. That's everyone then, all 7 of the recruits they sought to find. Perfect, perfect. Izuku smiles, glancing at everyone, and walking right up to the closed, high-security, 3-foot metal door and knocking. Like good little students, they've all returned, and even brought friends. He could have Kaminari short-circuit the barrier and have them get in that way, considering all their bracelets are sitting in a neat pile in the branch of a tree not too far from their dorm. But that would be impolite, wouldn't it? Slowly, the door opens, mechanisms whirring as they struggle to let the security measures release, and out steps Shoyuta Aizawa, his eyebags worse than usual and a smudge of what seems to be ink on his forehead. The man immediately glares at them all, but Izuku takes another step forward and takes the heat for them before either Todoroki or Katsuki gets any ideas. They seem to be the most impulsive, strangely enough. Hey, Eraser. Sorry for breaking curfew. Breaking curfew? You think what you did was breaking curfew? Breaking curfew with a couple of friends, Kaminari smiles, walking up and draping his arm across Izuku's shoulder, although he lets it drop when Izuku flinches away, subtle and yet noticeable at the same time. What the hell were you thinking? How'd you escape? And how the F did you get your quirk suppressors off? Izuku gets the sneaking feeling that Aizawa doesn't mean to curse in front of them and it just happens, slips out with how sad he's feeling, but he ignores that in favor of grinning, the sort of shy grin that used to PSS Katsuki off so much when they were younger. That's for me to know and you to find out. Now, Eraser, you gathered our program together because I gave you a list and a requirement. You remember, yes? Most likely knowing that Izuku's more than willing to close his mouth and never open it again if he doesn't, Aizawa decides to fall along, although his grip is still steady on his capture scarf. He doesn't trust them. Or he doesn't change the new arrivals. But that's all fine and dandy because Izuku likes all of his distant allies at least somewhat afraid of him. Yes? I've decided to extend the deal, Izuku nods, gesturing around to everyone that accepted their offer. Jairu offers awkward finger guns, whereas Shuji tilts his head in greeting with a blue mask glinting in the evening light. Ajuru crosses his arms and Tokoyami narrows his eyes. And you want? Aizawa starts slowly. He slowly lowers his hand from his capture weapon. Everyone here to be part of your miracle list? Izuku nods. After all, the only thing that changes is a license. Or isn't that what you said? They're destined for disaster, Netsu says cheerfully, a cup of tea in his hand as his small little legs dangle off the couch he's sitting on. Across from him sits Shoyuta, with another teacup in hand despite the fact that he doesn't like tea, the morning sun glinting off the glass coffee table between them. Oh, the reform class. Netsu smiles. Of course, the reform class. Morality is a ticking time bomb for them. They're young enough that their ideals aren't set in stone yet, but the clay is drying, and with the blood on their hands already, it's hard to reshape something formed from grief. Children's lives should never be formed by grief, by anger, Aizawa mumbles, slurping his tea. It makes the disgusting liquid go down easier, in his opinion. The creature's smile never sways. It's unnerving. And yet they are. I'm sure I know a rather tired homeroom teacher who'd know as such. Now, they've each got their problems, but together, you might be onto something. I know I am. And you want to get them through 3 years of UA's toughest curriculum when most of them dropped out in middle school if they attended schooling at all? Yes. And you really, truly believe this is the best option? When they'll never be able to walk in the daylight again with the warrants and the death certificates and the worried family members that don't know a thing about where their child is now. Shoyuta hesitates. He's done his research. He knows Inko Midoriya is alive and well. She's the one who reported her son missing all those years ago. Aya and Chio Kirishima mourned a son dead from a suicide that never happened. Mitsuki and Masaru Bakugo haven't made a public appearance since the private funeral of Katsuki Bakugo. Tensei hasn't seen Tenya in years. With the way the reform program is structured, all the laws they're skirting already by harboring the kids in the first place. No, none of them are going to see their kids again. Tensei won't see his brother. That weight will belong on Shuta's shoulders and no one else's. He holds his head high as he answers, "Yes, I do." One story comes to an end, and another swings into motion.